Hello everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. I've never been one to believe in monsters or ghosts or any of that stuff. I've always been a practical guy, you know? But what happened back in July of 1967 changed all that. It's been over 50 years, and I still get chills thinking about it. I've only told a handful of people, and most of them just shrug it off or laugh. But I know what I saw, what I heard, what I felt. It was real, and it was terrifying. It was a rainy night, and me and two friends, we'll call them Joe and Mike, though those aren't their real names, just to keep it simple, decided to go bass fishing at this old strip mine pit west of Farmington, Illinois. We'd been there before a few times, but never at night and never in the rain. The pit was this huge man-made lake, surrounded by steep banks and tall reeds that swayed in the wind. The water was dark and murky, and you could see the outlines of old mining equipment rusting away in the distance. It was kind of eerie even on a good day, but that night it felt different. We got there just as the sun was setting, the sky all grey and heavy with clouds. The rain was coming down steady, not a downpour, but enough to soak through our clothes if we stayed out too long. We had our fishing gear, rods, tackle boxes, a cooler with some beers, and we set up on the bank near where we usually fished. The air was thick with the smell of wet earth and decaying plants, and the sound of frogs and crickets was everywhere, like a constant background noise that you almost stopped noticing after a while. Fishing was poor from the start. We cast our lines again and again, but nothing was biting. Maybe it was the rain or the time of year, but we barely got a nibble. We were starting to get frustrated, joking around about how we should have just stayed home and watched TV. Joe was the one who always brought a knife with him, not for anything bad, just for cutting lines or whatever, and he had it tucked in his belt. Mike was the nervous type, always jumping at shadows, but I was usually the calm one. That night, though, none of us were calm for long. It must have been around 10 o'clock when we first heard it. At first, it was just a low hum, like a distant engine or something, but it got louder fast, until it was this droning sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It was like a giant insect, but way louder than any bug I've ever heard. The sound grated on my ears, like it was vibrating inside my skull, and it actually hurt to listen to it. I remember covering my ears, but it didn't help much. It was like the sound was coming from inside me. Then, all of a sudden, the frogs and crickets went silent. Just like that. 1 minute, the night was full of noise, and the next, it was dead quiet, except for that awful droning. It was eerie, like someone had flipped a switch. We all stopped what we were doing and looked at each other. Mike's eyes were wide, and Joe had his hand on his knife. We didn't say anything, but we all knew something was wrong. That's when we heard the splash. It wasn't a small splash, like a fish jumping or a rock falling in. It was huge, like something massive had dropped into the water. We turned toward the sound, and that's when we saw it. Emerging from the reeds on the far side of the pit, maybe 50 yards away at first, was this creature. I can't even describe it properly because it happened so fast, and it was dark, but I'll try. It was tall, really tall, maybe 7 or 8 feet, and covered in dark, wet hair or fur that clung to its body. It moved through the reeds like it was part of the environment, not crashing through, but gliding almost. Then it stopped, right at the edge of the water, and stood motionless. It was watching us. I could feel its eyes on me, even from that distance. We were frozen, just staring back. The droning sound was still going, and now it seemed to be coming from the creature itself. It started moving toward us, not fast, but steady, like it was taking its time. It waded through the shallow water near the bank, and with every step, the droning got louder. more painful. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I think I was holding my breath without realizing it. The creature got closer until it was only about 10 feet away from us, still standing in the reeds. I could see its shape more clearly now. Broad shoulders, long arms, and a head that seemed too small for its body. It didn't look like any animal I'd ever seen. Not a bear, not a man, just something else. That's when I panicked. I don't even remember deciding to run. My body just took over. I turned and bolted, heading toward a house I knew was about a quarter-mile away, up on a hill. I thought if I could get there, maybe someone could help us, call the police or something. But as I ran, I glanced back and saw my friends weren't following me. Instead, Joe and Mike had jumped into the lake, waist-deep in the water. Joe had his knife out, holding it in front of him like he was ready to fight. Mike was clinging to him, looking terrified. The creature seemed to notice them and turned away from me. It let out this low growl that mixed with the droning, and then it retreated back into the reeds, but it didn't go far. It just stood there, watching them. I stopped running, my legs feeling like jelly. I was too scared to go on alone, and I didn't want to leave my friends. So I turned back, stumbling down the bank toward them. By the time I reached the water's edge, the creature had moved back a bit. But it was still there, maybe 20 feet away now, half hidden in the reeds. Joe and Mike were shivering, soaked from the waist down, and Joe was still holding the knife. "What the hell is that thing?" Mike whispered, his voice trembling. I didn't have an answer. We all just stood there for a moment, paralyzed by fear. Then the creature took a step forward, and that broke the spell. "We need to hide," Joe said, his voice low and urgent. We scrambled up the bank toward where we'd left our gear, and that's when we saw the overturned John boat. It was an old wooden boat we'd used before, but we'd flipped it over to keep the rain out of it. Without a word, we all ducked under it, pulling it down over us like a shelter. It was cramped under there, with the three of us squeezed together. The ground was muddy and cold, and the boat smelled of damp wood and fish. We could see out through a small gap between the boat and the ground, enough to watch what was happening outside. The droning sound was still going, but now it was mixed with this stomping noise, like heavy footsteps on the wet ground. The creature was patrolling the shoreline, walking back and forth in front of us. We could hear its footsteps getting closer, then fading away, then coming back. It was like it was searching for us. Every time it passed by, the droning would get louder, and I'd feel this cold dread wash over me. My whole body was shaking, and I could hear Mike breathing heavily next to me, almost hyperventilating. Joe was gripping his knife so tight his knuckles were white. The worst moment was when it stopped right next to the boat. We could see its feet through the gap, huge muddy feet with long toes, covered in that same dark hair. It stood there for what felt like forever, just a few inches away from us. The droning was so loud, it felt like my ears were going to bleed, and I could smell this weird, musky odor, like wet dog and something else, something rotten. I was sure it knew we were there, and I thought any second it would flip the boat over and we'd be done for. I closed my eyes and prayed, something I hadn't done since I was a kid. Mike was crying softly, and Joe had his arm around him, trying to keep him quiet. Time dragged on. We must have been under that boat for hours. The rain kept falling, and we were all soaked and freezing. My clothes were stuck to my skin, and I could feel the cold seeping into my bones. Every now and then, the creature would let out this low, guttural sound that made the hair on my arms stand up. It wasn't just the fear of being found. It was the feeling of being hunted, like we were prey, and it was the predator. I kept peeking out through the gap, watching the creature move. It never seemed to tire, just kept pacing back and forth along the bank. Sometimes it would stop and stare out at the water or back toward the reeds, but it always came back to where we were hiding. I remember thinking how surreal it all was. Here we were, 3 grown men, hiding under a boat from something we couldn't even name, in the middle of nowhere, in the rain. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it. Was it a bear? No, Bears don't make sounds like that, and they don't stand and watch you for hours. Was it a person in a costume? That seemed even crazier. Who would be out here in the rain doing this? And the sound, it was too consistent, too organic, like it was part of the creature. I'd heard stories about Bigfoot, but I always thought they were just tall tales. Now I wasn't so sure. The hours passed slowly. I checked my watch at one point. It was around 2 in the morning, and we'd been hiding for what felt like an eternity. The creature was still out there, still stomping and droning. My legs were cramping from being curled up, and I had to shift positions carefully to avoid making noise. Joe and Mike were dozing off occasionally, but every time the sound got louder, they'd jerk awake, eyes wide with fear. Around 4 o'clock, the rain started to let up, and the sky began to lighten just a bit in the east. Dawn was coming. The creature seemed to sense it too. Its pacing slowed, and the droning sound became less intense. It stopped near the boat one last time, and I held my breath thinking this was it, but instead it turned and walked away, back toward the reeds. We heard a splash as it entered the water, and then the droning faded until it was gone. We stayed under the boat for a long time after that, too scared to move. The frogs and crickets started up again, slowly at first, then all at once, like the world had woken up from a nightmare. The sun began to rise, casting a pale light over the pit. Everything looked normal. The water, the reeds, the sky. But it felt different, like the air was still charged with whatever had been there. Finally, Joe pushed the boat up slightly and peered out. "It's gone," he said, his voice hoarse. We crawled out from under the boat, stiff and sore, and stood there looking around. The ground was muddy and torn up from the creature's footsteps, and there was that musky smell lingering in the air. We didn't say much. We just gathered our gear as fast as we could and headed back to the car. The drive home was quiet. None of us wanted to talk about what happened. We dropped Mike off first, then Joe, and I went home alone. I took a hot shower and tried to wash away the fear, but it stayed with me. For weeks afterward, I had trouble sleeping, and every little noise would make me jump. I never went back to that strip mine pit, and neither did my friends. We drifted apart after that, I think, because being together reminded us of that night. I've thought about it a lot over the years. I've listened to recordings of supposed Bigfoot sounds, and some of them are similar to what we heard, that low, droning noise that seems to vibrate right through you. But I still don't know what it was. All I know is that we encountered something that night, something powerful and unknown, and it left me with a fear that's never really gone away. Sometimes when I'm out camping or fishing, I'll hear a strange sound and my heart will start racing, and I'll remember that creature standing in the reeds watching us. I'll never forget it. Story 2. It was January of 2013, and I was up near the Mogollon Rim, a place I've hunted my whole life. The air was so cold it felt like it was cracking my face, and the snow was deep, that quiet, heavy kind that mutes the whole world. I was out for mountain lion, solo, like I usually am, just me and my 2 dogs, Buck and Duke. They're good dogs, solid, not the kind to spook easy. We'd been out since before first light, following a set of fresh paw prints that led down into one of the deeper canyons, the kind where the pine trees grow so thick you lose the sky. The routine was normal. My breath plumed out in front of me. The rifle was a familiar weight on my shoulder, and the only sounds were the crunch of my boots in the snow and the occasional huff from the dogs as they worked the scent. I remember thinking it was a perfect day for it. The snow makes tracking easier, and the cold keeps most other people indoors. It was just me and the silence of the woods. I'd stop every now and then to listen, to scan the timber. Everything was as it should be. We were maybe 2-3 hours deep, following this game trail that switched back down the canyon wall. The prints were clear, a big cat, moving with purpose. I was focused, my mind on the hunt, on reading the signs in the snow. Then everything changed. It wasn't a slow change, It was like a switch got flipped. The dogs were maybe 20 yards ahead of me, noses to the ground, when they both just stopped, not a gradual slowdown. They froze, their bodies went rigid, ears pinned back, and they stopped making any sound at all. No panting, no whining, nothing. That was the first wrong thing. Buck, the older one, let out this low growl that was more of a vibration I felt than a sound I heard. Then they both tucked their tails and backed up, slinking behind my legs, pressing their bodies against my calves. I'd never seen them do that. Not for a bear, not for a cat, not for anything. The silence that fell over the canyon was absolute. It was a heavy, pressing silence, the kind that feels like a physical weight on your eardrums. The normal little sounds, the drip of snowmelt from a branch, the scrabble of a squirrel, were just gone. It was dead quiet, and that's when I heard it. Thump, thump, thump. It was a heavy, rhythmic sound, not the sharp crack of a branch. This was a deep, solid impact, like someone was dropping a full sack of grain onto the frozen ground, and it was close. My first stupid thought was, is that a person? But it was too heavy, too solid. No person walks like that. The rhythm was slow, deliberate. Thump, thump. My heart started hammering against my ribs, a frantic, panicked beat that was suddenly the loudest thing in the world. I brought my rifle down from my shoulder, my hands already feeling clumsy inside my thick gloves. The safety clicked off, a tiny sound that seemed to echo. I held my breath, trying to pinpoint the direction. It was coming from my left uphill, through a thick stand of ponderosa pine and juniper. I took a slow, careful step forward, the snow crunching treacherously under my boot. The dogs were trembling against my legs, a full-body shake I could feel through my own bones. I peered through a gap in the trees, squinting against the glare of the snow, and then I saw it. It was standing maybe 50 yards away, partly obscured by tree trunks, but there was no mistaking what it was. It was massive, upright. It had to be over 8 feet tall, easy. Its shoulders were impossibly wide, like the front end of my pickup truck. It was covered in dark brown hair, long and shaggy, matted in places. Its arms were ridiculously long, hanging down past its knees, swinging slightly with each of those heavy steps. It was just walking, moving parallel to me through the trees. My brain short-circuited. It tried to file it under bear, but bears don't walk like that. They don't have that build. This thing was built like a power lifter, thick through the chest and legs. The sheer size of it was staggering. It was a living, breathing thing that simply should not exist. I stood there, frozen, my finger resting on the trigger guard. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I was just absorbing the sheer wrongness of it. The thump of its footsteps was a bass note I could feel in the soles of my feet, and then it turned its head. It wasn't a full body turn, it just swiveled its head toward me. Its head was sloped like a gorilla's, but bigger. It didn't have a pronounced neck. Its head just seemed to sit right on those huge shoulders. I saw a wide, flat jaw. I couldn't make out the eyes from that distance, just dark patches under a heavy brow ridge. But I knew. I absolutely knew it was looking right at me. That was the terror moment, the pure, undiluted fear that turned my blood to ice water. It saw me. It knew I was there. My body started screaming at me to run, but some deep primal instinct told me that would be the worst thing I could do. I forced myself to stay still. My eyes were locked on it, and that's when I heard another sound from the opposite direction, a low, guttural grunt from downhill. My head snapped to the right, my heart seizing in my chest. Oh, God, no. There was a second one. It was slightly smaller, but not by much, standing downhill from me, maybe 70 yards away. It was partially hidden behind a fallen log, but I could see its upper body, the same dark fur, the same immense shoulders. It was just standing there, watching. I was trapped between them. They had me pinched. The one uphill, the big one, let out a low growl. It wasn't a loud sound, it was deep. So deep it was less of a sound and more of a vibration that traveled through the air and settled in my chest. I felt it in my teeth. It was a rumbling, guttural noise that didn't belong to any animal I knew. The one downhill responded with a similar noise, a shorter, huffing grunt. They were talking to each other. They were communicating about me. The smell hit me then. I'd been so terrified I hadn't even noticed it. It was a musky, pungent stench, like a wet dog that had been rolling in rotten meat and old piss. It was thick and heavy in the cold air, so strong it made my eyes water and my stomach clench. It was the smell of something wild and ancient, something that lived deep in places people weren't meant to go. I started backing up, slowly, so slowly. Every muscle in my body was tensed, ready to bolt. My rifle was shaking in my hand so badly I knew I'd never be able to make an accurate shot. What would a shot even do? The thing was huge. A .30-06 might just piss it off. The thought of it charging, of those long arms reaching for me, was enough to make my legs feel like jelly. I kept my eyes darting between the two of them. The one uphill had stopped walking. It was just standing there, facing me. The one downhill took a step forward, then another. It was closing the distance, not running, just walking, its long arms swinging. It was coming for me. This is it, I thought. This is how I die. In this canyon, in the snow, torn apart by something nobody will ever believe exists. The fear was a physical pain in my gut. I could taste the copper penny taste of pure adrenaline in my mouth. I kept backing up, my boots scraping through the snow, my eyes wide, my breath coming in ragged, silent gasps. The lower one was maybe 40 yards away now. I could see its features more clearly, the broad, flat nose, the powerful set of its jaw. I was out of options. I was going to have to shoot. I raised my rifle, my arms trembling violently, the front sight post wobbling all over the place. I was aiming at the chest of the lower one, praying I'd hit something vital, knowing it probably wouldn't be enough. And then Buck barked. It was a sharp, piercing sound that shattered the oppressive silence. It wasn't a scared bark. It was a defiant, challenging bark. He'd broken from behind my legs and taken a few steps forward, his hackles raised, barking his head off at the creature downhill. Everything happened at once. The lower Sasquatch, the one that had been advancing on me, stopped. It turned its head toward the sound of the barking. The one uphill let out another one of those deep, chest-rattling growls. But this one sounded different, less focused on me. Then, as if they'd come to some silent agreement, they both moved. Not toward me. They turned and started moving parallel to the slope again. The big one uphill, the smaller one downhill, both heading in the same direction, toward where Buck was still barking. They moved through the trees with an eerie, fluid grace for something so huge, just melting into the timber. They were following the sound of the dog. I didn't wait. I didn't think. The moment their attention was off me, I turned and I ran. I've never run like that in my life. I crashed through the snow, not caring about the noise, my lungs burning with the cold air. I whistled a sharp, piercing sound, and the dogs, thank God, turned and ran with me. Duke was whining, a high-pitched panic sound, and Buck was running with his tail between his legs, but they were with me. I didn't look back. I just ran. I scrambled back up the game trail, my legs burning, slipping on icy rocks, grabbing onto tree branches to pull myself up. The only thing in my mind was the truck. Get to the truck. The image of those huge, dark forms moving through the trees was burned onto the back of my eyelids. I could still smell that god-awful stench in my nose. It felt like an eternity, but it was probably only 10-15 minutes of sheer, panic-fueled running before I burst out of the thicker timber and saw my old Ford pickup parked on the Forest Service road. I fumbled for the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the lock. I threw the door open, shoved the dogs into the cab. They piled onto the passenger seat. A trembling, panting heap, and I scrambled in after them, slamming the door and hitting the locks. I sat there for a long time, just gripping the steering wheel, my whole body shaking uncontrollably. I was gasping for air, sweating despite the cold. I stared out the windshield at the tree line, half expecting to see one of them step out onto the road. But there was nothing, just the quiet, snow-covered woods. I started the truck and got the hell out of there. I didn't stop shaking until I was back on the paved highway, surrounded by other cars. By normalcy, that was years ago. I still hunt, but never alone, and never in that particular canyon. I've told a few close friends, other hunters who know the woods like I do. Some believe me, some don't. It doesn't matter. I know what I saw. I know what was there. The Mogollon Rim is a big, wild place, and there are things in it that don't fit in any field guide. That day, the woods stopped being a place I just understood and became a place where I knew for a fact that I was not at the top of the food chain. The memory of those heavy footsteps, that musky smell, and the sight of that massive, sloping head turning to look at me is something that's stuck with me, a cold knot of fear in my stomach that's never really gone away. I was in their world and they let me go. I don't know why. I just know that I'll never forget the feeling of being prey. Story 3. This was back in July of 2017. We live on a small cattle farm just outside of Wilburton, Oklahoma. It's not a big spread, just enough for us to get by. Me, my wife, and our 2 kids. It's quiet out here, the kind of quiet where you can hear your own thoughts, or you could before that night. The day itself was totally normal, hot, stiflingly hot, the way only an Oklahoma July can be. The air was thick with humidity, and the cicadas were screaming from the trees. We'd had a late dinner, the kids were wound up from the heat, and it took a while to get them to bed. I remember standing on the back porch around 10 o'clock, just sipping a glass of water, looking out at the dark shapes of the barn and the woods beyond the pasture. The fireflies were putting on a show. It was peaceful. I had no idea that in less than an hour, that peace would be shattered into 1,000,000 pieces. I was in the living room, just about to turn off the TV and head to bed myself. The clock on the cable box read 10:28. I remember because I was thinking, all right, just a few more minutes. That's when I heard the first one. It wasn't a sound I can easily describe. It was a roar, but not like a lion or a bear. This was deeper, a guttural, booming noise that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It wasn't just heard, it was felt. The windows in the living room vibrated. A fine tremor went through the floorboards under my feet. I froze, the remote still in my hand. My first thought was some kind of industrial accident, maybe a gas explosion miles away, but the sound was too organic. Too alive. It came from the woods to the north of our property. The echo rolled across the fields and just hung in the air. Then silence. A heavy, waiting silence. I stood there, not breathing, listening. Then another roar answered from the south. Then a third from the east behind the barn. They were communicating. I know that sounds insane, but I felt it in my gut. This wasn't random. They were calling to each other, surrounding the house. My wife came out of our bedroom, her face pale. "What was that?" she whispered. Before I could answer, another roar, closer this time, much closer, from just beyond the tree line at the edge of the yard. This one was different. It was full of rage, a challenge. The pictures on the wall, a framed photo of the kids from school picture day, rattled against the plaster. Then the banging started. It wasn't a knock. It was a heavy, solid thump against the side of the house. The whole structure shook. It was followed by another and another, moving along the wall. Something big was outside, and it was hitting the house, hard. I ran to the front window and peered through the blinds into the darkness. I couldn't see anything, just the deep black of a moonless night. The kids were awake now, crying. My wife gathered them in our bedroom, and I ran to the gun cabinet. I have a .30-06 rifle, for coyotes mostly, sometimes a sick cow. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the key in the lock. I loaded it, the brass of the shells feeling cold and definitive in my sweaty hands. Another impact, this one on the back of the house near the kitchen. It was louder, more violent. I heard the distinct sound of shattering glass from the living room. I left the kitchen and ran back in there, my rifle held tight. The big picture window was broken. Not just cracked, but a whole section was gone. Shards of glass glittering on the floor and the couch, and there, gripping the windowsill where the glass had been, was a hand. It was massive, dark and covered in coarse black hair. The fingers were thick like sausages, but long, and they gripped the wood of the frame so hard I heard it splinter. The sheer size of it made my brain stutter. It was easily twice the size of my own hand. I couldn't move. I just stared, and then it shifted its grip, and a head slowly rose into the broken window frame. The smell hit me first. It's a smell I'll never forget. It was a mix of a wet dog, but 100 times stronger, and underneath it, the sweet, sickly stench of rotting meat. It was so potent, it made my eyes water. Then I saw its eyes. They were a deep, glowing red. Not like demon red from a movie, but a feral, intelligent red, like a coal's in a dark forge. They locked onto mine. This wasn't the blank stare of an animal. This thing was looking at me. It was studying me. Its face was mostly shadow, but I could see a heavy brow ridge and a flattened, wide nose. It let out a low, rumbling growl that vibrated in my chest, and then it was gone, the hand slipping away from the window frame. I heard my wife screaming my name from the bedroom. Outside, the night erupted into chaos. Our cattle, all 15 of them, were going insane. I could hear them bellowing in pure terror, the sound of wooden fence posts snapping like twigs. Something was in the pasture with them, something or several somethings. I had to do something. The feeling of being trapped, of being prey in my own home, was overwhelming. I ran to the back door, which has a small window at eye level. I didn't open it, I just looked out. The motion sensor light on the barn was on, casting a sickly yellow glow over the yard. I saw one of them. It was standing near my pickup truck. It was huge, I mean impossibly huge. It had to be 8, maybe 9 feet tall. Its body was covered in the same dark, shaggy hair, and its shoulders were massive and sloped. It was just standing there, looking toward the barn. Then it turned its head and looked right at the house, right at me. Those red eyes seemed to pin me in place from across the yard. That's when I lost it. I raised the rifle, fumbled with the latch, and shoved the back door open. I didn't step all the way out, just stood in the doorway. I pointed the rifle into the air and fired. The crack of the shot was deafening in the confined space of the porch. The silence that followed was the most terrifying sound I have ever heard. It lasted for maybe 2 seconds. Then the night exploded. Roars came from every direction, so loud and so full of pure, undiluted fury that I felt my knees go weak. They weren't scared. I had pissed them off. The one by the truck let out a shriek that was higher pitched, almost like a scream, and then it moved. It didn't run like a man, it loped, a powerful ground-eating gait, and in 2 strides it was at the barn. It slammed its shoulder into the side of the barn, and I heard wood groan and crack. Another one came around the corner of the house. This one was even bigger. It stopped by the pickup truck, and I saw it clearly. It was so tall, it could look down into the bed of the truck. It placed one of those huge hands on the roof of the cab, and I swear to God, the metal of the roof dented under the pressure. The smell was everywhere now, seeping into the house through the broken window, clinging to the back of my throat. I backed into the kitchen, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. I slammed the door shut and locked it, my back against the wood, breathing in ragged gasps. That's when I saw it at the back door window. I was still leaning against the door when a shadow fell over the little window. I turned my head slowly. It was right there. Its face was pressed against the glass. Those massive red eyes were inches from mine, separated only by a 1/4 inch of pane. I could see the texture of the hair on its face, the deep wrinkles around its eyes. It was sniffing, its nostrils flaring, fogging the glass with each hot, rank breath. I was frozen, not just scared, but paralyzed. It was looking directly into me. I felt like a specimen under a microscope. There was an intelligence there, a cold, ancient awareness that stripped away all my illusions of control. I was nothing to this thing. My house was nothing. My rifle was nothing. In that moment, I understood what it felt like to be completely and utterly helpless. It stared at me for what felt like an hour. I could feel the pressure of its gaze like a physical weight. My wife was crying in the other room. The kids were sobbing, and I was stuck here, having a silent standoff with a monster from a nightmare. Then it made a sound, a low, guttural chuffing noise, right against the glass. It sounded almost like a derisive laugh. Then it pulled back and melted back into the darkness. The rest of the night was a blur of terror. The pounding on the walls continued, sometimes soft, sometimes with enough force to make the light fixtures sway. The roars and screams echoed through the woods. The cattle were silent now, which was somehow worse. I stayed by the door, the rifle across my knees, just waiting. I didn't know what for. For them to break in? For the sun to rise? I didn't think the sun would ever rise again. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, the activity started to die down. The roars became fewer and farther between. The heavy footsteps circling the house ceased. By around 4 in the morning, the only sound was the wind, the normal Oklahoma night wind. The silence was almost as jarring as the noise had been. We didn't sleep. We just sat huddled together in the bedroom until the first gray light of dawn began to seep through the windows. I waited until it was fully light before I dared to move. I took the rifle and with my heart in my throat, I unlocked the back door and stepped outside. The yard was a war zone. Our garbage cans were tipped over, their contents strewn everywhere. Not just tipped, but ripped apart. Deep 3-toed footprints were sunk into the dry ground. I got a tape measure later. They were 16 inches long. 16 inches. I followed them with my eyes. They went from the woods to the house, to the barn, everywhere. The side of the house was scarred with long, deep gouges in the siding. The barn door was hanging by one hinge, and there was a massive dent in the wall where the creature had slammed into it. The pasture fence was destroyed, posts snapped off at the base. Our cattle were gone. We found them later miles away, scattered and terrified, but alive. I was standing there, trying to process the scale of the destruction, when I saw it. Out in the middle of the far pasture, maybe 300 yards away, stood one of them. It was just standing there, watching the house, watching me. The morning sun was behind it, silhouetting its huge, shaggy form. It stood there for a full minute, perfectly still. Then it turned and walked into the tree line. It didn't run. It just left. We moved into town for 2 weeks. We eventually came back. This is our home, but it's not the same. It never will be. I go out at night now with a spotlight and my rifle, but it's just for show. I know if they ever come back, there's nothing I can really do. The thing I can't shake, the thing that haunts me more than the roars or the smell or the destruction, was that look, that intimate, terrifying gaze through the back door window. In its eyes, I didn't see mindless aggression. I saw recognition. I saw something that knew what I was and knew that I was afraid. And in that moment, I knew what we were to them. We were just temporary. Story 4. It was still dark out, the kind of deep, quiet dark you only get on a county road miles from anywhere. The clock on my dashboard glowed 5:45. I'd been making this same drive to work for almost 11 years, down County Road, 20 miles outside of Jasper. I knew every pothole, every leaning fence post, every farmhouse light that was always on. It was Tuesday. Just a Tuesday. My thermos of coffee was between my legs. The radio was playing some soft classic rock, and my mind was already at my desk, thinking about the spreadsheets I had to tackle. The headlights cut a tunnel through the blackness. the yellow lines flicking past in a steady, hypnotic rhythm. Up ahead, maybe a couple hundred yards, I saw something sitting right in the middle of my lane. My first thought, the automatic one, was that it was an ATV. Somebody's four-wheeler had broken down, or maybe some kids had left it there as a prank. It was a dark, blocky shape, low to the ground. I eased my foot off the gas. I wasn't going that fast to begin with. You learn not to on these roads with deer and raccoons and God knows what else. But I slowed down even more. My high beams were on, and as I got closer, the shape wasn't making sense. It was too solid, too still. It wasn't the right shape for an ATV. It was just a mass. I was maybe 50 feet away when it moved. It didn't startle or jump. It just slid. It uncurled from itself in one fluid motion and went over the edge of the road into the deep drainage ditch on the passenger side. It was fast, but not like a deer is fast. It was powerful, a single, deliberate movement. My brain was lagging, trying to process what I'd just seen. It was big. Whatever it was big. I let the car creep forward, my foot hovering over the brake. My heart was starting to thump a little harder in my chest. I peered into the ditch, my hands tight on the steering wheel. The high beams lit up the tall, wet grass and the scrubby bushes, and then it stood up. I swear to God, my blood went cold, like someone had opened a trap door in my stomach, and all the warmth just fell out. It rose from the ditch, and it was massive. It had to be over 6 feet tall, probably more. It was built solid, like a power lifter or a gorilla, but standing straight up. Its entire body was a solid, matte black, like it was made of shadow. It didn't have a glossy sheen like a bear's fur. It was just black, absorbing the light from my headlights. It was facing away from me, and for a second, I just stared at the sheer breadth of its back and shoulders. They were enormous, hunched with muscle, and then it took a step. There was a fallen log right there, one of those old, thick pines that had come down in a storm last year. It was about 3 feet high and thick. I've seen men struggle to climb over something like that. This thing didn't even break its stride. It lifted one leg and stepped over the log like it was a curb, effortlessly, like it weighed nothing. The movement was so smooth, so unnaturally graceful for something that size. It was the most terrifying thing I've ever seen. It wasn't the loping run of a bear or the frantic scramble of a person. It was just a step, a single powerful step that cleared an obstacle I would have had to climb over. Then it was gone. It took 2 more strides and just melted into the wall of pine trees. 1 second it was there, a solid physical thing, and the next, the woods had swallowed it. There was no sound, no cracking branches, no rustling leaves. Nothing. Just the hum of my car's engine and the soft sound of the radio. I sat there frozen. My foot was still on the brake. I could feel my own pulse hammering in my throat. I looked at the ditch, at the log. It was still there. The scene was completely normal, except it wasn't. It was tainted. I had just seen something that wasn't supposed to be real. My first instinct was to get the hell out of there. I slammed my foot on the gas, and the car lurched forward. I gripped the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I kept checking my rearview mirror, expecting to see it running after the car, but there was nothing. Just empty, dark road. For the next 10 minutes, my whole body was trembling. It was a fine, uncontrollable shake, like I was cold, but I was sweating. My mind was racing, trying to find a logical explanation. A bear in a wetsuit, a guy in a costume, out here at 5:45 in the morning, in the middle of nowhere. It made no sense. The way it moved, that wasn't a person. The proportions were all wrong. The shoulders were too wide, the arms too long, and the sheer, silent power of it, stepping over that log like it was nothing. That image is burned into my brain. I got to work 20 minutes early. I just sat in the parking lot with the engine off, trying to get myself together. I could still smell my coffee, but the thought of drinking it made me feel sick. I kept replaying it in my head, over and over. The dark shape, the way it slid into the ditch, the way it stood up. That step. When I finally went inside, the office was quiet. Only a few of the early birds were there. I went straight to the break room to pour out my cold coffee and get some water. My hand was still shaking when I held the cup. Brenda from accounting came in and said, "You okay, hun? You look like you've seen a ghost." I almost laughed. A ghost would have been easier. I took a breath and just said it. I saw something on the way to work, on County Road. I don't know what it was. She looked at me, curious. Like a deer? "No," I said, and my voice sounded strange to me. "Bigger, a lot bigger. It was tall and black, and it just stepped over a fallen tree like it was nothing." She chuckled a little. "Probably just a big old bear. They can stand up, you know." I just nodded. I didn't have the energy to argue, but I knew. In my bones, I knew it wasn't a bear. I've lived in Texas for 53 years. I've seen bears. I know how they move. They don't move like that. They don't stand with that kind of erect, confident posture. And they sure as hell don't step over logs with that kind of casual, fluid grace. A bear would have clambered over it or gone around. I tried to focus on work, but I couldn't. My eyes kept drifting to the window, even though all I could see was the parking lot and the strip mall across the street. The normal world felt flimsy, like a painted backdrop. The real world was back on that county road, in those dark woods. I called my husband around 9. He was already out on our property checking fences. When he answered, his voice was cheerful. "Hey, darling, what's up?" I took a deep breath. Something happened this morning on my drive in. I told him everything, from the moment I saw the dark shape to the moment it vanished into the trees. I didn't leave anything out. I told him about the way it moved, the sheer size of it, the silence. He was quiet for a long moment. "You sure it wasn't a shadow? The light plays tricks out there." "It wasn't a shadow, Mark. It was solid. It moved. It stood up." I could hear the frustration and fear tightening my voice. Okay, he said, his tone shifting to placating. "I'm headed into town later for parts. I'll drive that stretch and take a look, all right? I'll see if there's any tracks or anything." I felt a small wave of relief, evidence. Maybe he would find something, a footprint, broken branches, something to prove I wasn't going crazy. The rest of the workday was a blur. I'd stare at my computer screen, and all I could see was that black shape rising from the ditch. The feeling of cold dread never really left me. It was just sitting there, in the pit of my stomach. When I drove home that evening, the sun was still up. It was a normal, beautiful Texas evening, but as I got closer to the spot, my heart started racing again. I slowed down, my eyes glued to the side of the road. There it was, the ditch, the fallen log. It looked so innocent in the daylight. My husband's truck was already in our driveway when I got home. He was on the porch, drinking a beer. I walked up the steps, my whole body tense. "Well?" I asked, not even saying hello. He shook his head, a sympathetic look on his face. "I'm sorry, honey. I drove that whole stretch twice. I even pulled over and got out where you said it was. I walked the ditch. I looked at that log. There's nothing there, no tracks, no broken bushes, nothing. The ground is too hard and grassy. There's no sign of anything." The hope I'd been clinging to just evaporated. "Nothing?" My voice was small. "Nothing," he said gently. "Maybe it was just one of those things, a trick of the light in your tired brain, filling in the blanks." I wanted to scream. It wasn't a trick. It was real. I saw it. I felt its presence. The terror was the most real thing I'd felt in years. But there was no evidence, no proof. Just me and a memory that was already starting to feel like a dream. I've lived in this state for 53 years. I was raised to be practical, to believe in what I can see and touch. I never put any stock in stories about Bigfoot or Sasquatch or whatever you want to call it. I thought it was all nonsense for TV shows and silly podcasts. But now I don't know what to believe. Because I saw something that day. something that shouldn't exist, something massive and black and impossibly strong, that moved with a silence and a grace that defied any animal I've ever known. And it stepped over that log like it was nothing, and then it was just gone, leaving me here with a fear I can't shake and a question that's going to haunt me for the rest of my life. I just don't know anymore. I really don't. Story 5. All right, I'll just get this out. I've been sitting on it for a while, but I need to tell someone who might get it. I don't talk about this with people in my normal life. They'd either think I'm lying or that I've lost it. But you guys seem like you might understand weird shit that happens out in the woods. So, my job, I work as a seasonal wildlife biotech for Redwood National Park. It's not a glamorous gig. It's a lot of hiking, a lot of data collection, and a whole lot of being wet and tired. This happened back in late October. The days were getting shorter. The air had that crisp, cold bite to it that means winter isn't far off. That specific day, my partner, I won't use his name, just call him my partner, and I were way the hell out there. We were several miles south of Bald Hills Road, way off any maintained trail, at around 2,000 feet of elevation. Our mission for the day was spotted owl surveys. Basically, we hike to specific GPS points, call for owls, and listen for a response. It's usually pretty peaceful, if not a little boring. The other part of the job, the part that matters for this story, is that we were carrying a live trap. It's a small metal cage, and inside were a couple of live mice. They're used as bait for certain studies, not for the owls. And man, those mice, they smelled terrible. It's a pungent, musky, sort of sweet and sour smell of rodent piss and fear. You get used to it, but you never really stop noticing it. It clings to your clothes, your pack, your hands. It's just part of the job. We'd been bushwhacking for hours. Bushwhacking is just a fancy word for hiking where there is no trail. You're pushing through dense stands of young redwoods and Douglas firs, climbing over downed logs that are slick with moss, your boots sinking into a deep, spongy carpet of needles and damp earth. It's slow, exhausting work. Your clothes are constantly getting snagged on branches, and you're always ducking under something or climbing over something else. The light was starting to go. That's the thing about the deep woods, especially under the redwood canopy. Daylight fades fast. It wasn't full dark yet, but the sun was definitely on its way down. The world was taking on that deep blue-gray tone. Shadows, which were just patches of darker shade before, were now becoming solid, inky pools. The air got colder too. You could see your breath in little puffs. We were quiet mostly. You get like that after hours of this. Just the sound of our breathing, the crunch of our boots, the rustle of our rain gear against the undergrowth. We were focused on getting to our last survey point before we lost the light completely and had to turn on our headlamps. And then we heard it. It wasn't a subtle sound. It was a loud, sharp crack. Not a small twig snapping. This was a branch, a thick one. The sound echoed through the quiet of the forest for a second, then got swallowed up by the trees. My partner and I just froze. We stopped dead in our tracks. We looked at each other, and I saw the same alertness in his eyes that I felt. It's a professional thing. You hear a sound like that, your brain instantly runs through the catalogue. Bear? Could be. They're around. Mountain lion? Less likely to be that clumsy, but possible. A falling branch? Maybe, but there was no wind. We stood there for what felt like a full minute just listening. The forest had gone dead quiet. No birds, no squirrels chattering, nothing. That's the second sign. When the woods go silent, something is there that shouldn't be. My heart was starting to thump against my ribs, a dull, fast rhythm. I held my breath, trying to hear past the blood rushing in my ears. Then we heard the footsteps. They weren't like any animal footsteps I've ever heard. I've heard bears. They have a heavy, plodding, four-footed gait. You hear the steps, then the rustle. This was different. This was a bipedal rhythm. Step, step, step. 2 feet, and they were fast. Not a walk, but not a run either. A quick purposeful stride. It was off to our left, maybe 30, 40 yards into the thick timber. We couldn't see anything. The undergrowth was too dense, the shadows too deep. My partner gestured with his head, a silent question. "You hear that?" I just nodded, my mouth suddenly dry. We started moving again, but slower now. Our senses dialed up to 11. We were no longer just hiking. We were prey trying to figure out where the predator was. The smell from the mouse cage seemed to intensify, like it was broadcasting our location. And then the thing started to move with us. It wasn't just staying in one place. It was pacing us. We'd hear it to our left. Then a minute later, the footsteps would circle around and we'd hear them behind us. It was moving through the brush like it wasn't even there. We were making a huge racket, snapping twigs, rustling ferns. But this thing, it was silent except for those footfalls. No cracking branches, no heavy rustling. It moved with an agility that was just unnatural. The feeling of being watched was so intense, it was like a physical pressure on the back of my neck. Every hair on my arms and my neck was standing straight up. I kept glancing over my shoulder, but I'd only ever catch a glimpse of a shadow shifting, or see the ferns swaying just after something had passed. At one point, it crossed our trail. We came to a small game path that cut through a particularly thick patch of salmonberry bushes. We paused. And right then, we both saw the ferns on the other side of the path shiver, not from the wind. There was no wind. They just shook, and then were still. It had crossed right in front of us, maybe 20 feet away, and we hadn't heard a damn thing. It was fast, unbelievably fast. That's when the real terror started to set in. This wasn't a curious bear. A bear doesn't move like that. A bear doesn't circle you with this kind of intelligent, deliberate pressure. A mountain lion would be hiding, waiting to ambush. This thing was herding us or playing with us, I don't know. But it felt intelligent. My partner's face was pale. He kept his voice low, a tight whisper. "What the hell is that?" I just shook my head. I had no answer. My mind was racing, trying to fit this into a box labeled known animal, and failing completely. My hands were clenched so tight on the straps of my backpack that my knuckles were white. The stupid mouse cage felt like it weighed 100 pounds, and that smell was everywhere, a sickly sweet beacon. The light was fading fast now. The world was shades of deep blue and black. We had our headlamps in our pockets, but neither of us turned them on. It felt like turning on a light would be an admission, like we were acknowledging it was now a night operation, and the rules had changed. Or maybe we were just scared that the light would show us something we really didn't want to see. We picked up the pace, no longer trying to be quiet. We were just trying to get the hell out of there. We were crashing through the brush, our breath coming in ragged gasps. The thing kept pace with us effortlessly. We'd hear it on one side, then it would be ahead of us, then behind us again. It was like it was toying with us, showing us it could be anywhere it wanted. And then I saw it. I don't know why I looked over my shoulder at that exact moment. I just did. And there it was. A large, dark figure. It dashed across the path behind us, maybe 50 feet back. It was on 2 feet. There's no mistaking that. It was tall. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing had to be at least 7.5, maybe 8 feet. It was thin, though. Not bulky like a bear stands on its hind legs. It was lean, almost wiry, but it moved with a powerful, fluid grace. Its stride. This is the part that really messes with my head. Its stride was exactly like that old Patterson-Gimlin film. You know the one. That smooth, powerful loping run. But this thing was faster, way faster. It was just a blur of dark, shadowy motion. It didn't run like a man. It was smoother, more efficient, like it was built for this environment in a way we could never be. It was there for maybe a second and a half, from one side of the path to the other. It didn't look at us. It just moved, a shadow dissolving into the deeper shadows of the trees. It vanished completely. No sound. The ferns it had run through didn't even seem to move. I stopped. I just stood there, frozen solid. My brain short-circuited. I couldn't process what I had just seen. My partner, a few steps ahead, turned and saw the look on my face. "What?" he hissed, his voice tight with panic. "What did you see?" I couldn't speak. I just pointed a shaky finger towards where it had been. He stared into the darkness, but there was nothing to see. It was just gone. But the feeling wasn't. The feeling of being watched, of being followed, was stronger than ever. It was a primal, gut-level certainty that we were not alone, and that whatever was with us was not an animal in any sense that I understood. We didn't say another word. We just started moving, almost at a run now. We were no longer bushwhacking. We were fleeing. We crashed through the forest, tripping over roots, branches whipping our faces. We didn't care. The only thing that mattered was putting distance between us and that thing. The feeling of being pursued stayed with us all the way until full dark. It was a palpable presence, a pressure at our backs. We finally hit an old logging road, a ribbon of slightly easier travel, and we ran down it until our lungs burned. We didn't stop until we saw the glow of our truck's headlights in the distance, a beacon of safety and the normal world. We threw our gear in the back, jumped in the cab, and locked the doors. We just sat there for a few minutes, breathing hard, not saying anything. The cab smelled like us, sweat, fear, and that faint lingering scent of mouse. Finally, my partner spoke, his voice ragged. "That wasn't a bear." I just shook my head. "No, it wasn't." "We're not reporting this, are we?" he asked. I knew what he meant. There's no protocol for this. What would we say? We think we were chased by Bigfoot? We'd be laughed out of the Park Service. Our careers, such as they were, would be over. We'd be the guys who saw the boogeyman. "No," I said, "we're not." We drove back in silence. The encounter left me deeply unnerved, and it still does. I can't stop thinking about it. The thought that keeps me up at night is the mouse cage, that terrible, smelly cage. Did the scent attract it? Was it curious? Was it hungry? I don't know. But that thought, that we were carrying a dinner bell through its territory, forever changed how I feel about going into that rugged, isolated country. I still do my surveys, but now I'm always listening, always watching the shadows, and I never ever carry the live traps any later than noon. I saw something in those woods that doesn't fit into any book, any training, any rational part of my brain. It was real, it was fast, and it knew we were there. Story 6. Bibril. It was one of those perfect Michigan afternoons in early October, the kind where the air feels crisp, but the sun still warms your skin. I decided to take the Jeep out on the trail that runs behind our property. It's a path I know like the back of my hand, a dirt and sand track that winds through a thick patch of woods before opening up near an old creek bed. I've driven it 100 times, probably more. It was just after 2 in the afternoon. I remember because I'd just finished my lunch and thought, why not a quick drive to clear my head? The Jeep's engine was rumbling that familiar, comforting sound, and I had my window down, my elbow resting on the door. The leaves were starting to turn, all these fiery yellows and reds, and the sunlight was cutting through the canopy in these long, lazy beams. It was peaceful. Normal. Just another Tuesday. I was probably going 10-15 miles an hour, not rushing, just enjoying the bump and sway of the trail. The woods on my left are really dense, a real tangle of pine and oak and underbrush so thick you can't see more than 20 feet in. To the right, it's a bit more open, sloping down toward the creek. That's when I first heard it. It wasn't a deer. I know what a deer sounds like crashing through the brush. Light, quick, a series of snaps. This was different. This was heavier, much heavier. It was a steady, powerful thump, thump, thump of something big moving fast, keeping pace with the Jeep. My first stupid thought was, did a neighbor's cow get loose? But that was ridiculous. We don't have cows back there. I glanced over, my eyes trying to pierce the shadowy gaps between the trees, and that's when I saw it. A figure, tall, dark, and covered in what looked like shaggy, blackish-brown hair. It was running on 2 legs, upright, just like a person, but it wasn't a person. Nothing about it was right. It was huge, its head clearing the lower branches of the trees. It must have been 7, 8 feet tall at least. The sheer size of it is what hit me first. This massive thing moving with a speed that didn't seem possible for something that big. Its gait was what stuck with me, what still replays in my head. It wasn't smooth. It was this loping, uneven run, like it was off balance but powerful at the same time. Its arms were long, swinging, and its whole torso seemed to rock with each stride. It wasn't graceful. It was raw and brutal looking, like a machine that was about to fly apart, but was being held together by pure force. It moved with this terrifying purpose, just eating up the ground, keeping right alongside me for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 3 or 4 seconds. My heart just seized in my chest. It was a cold, hard lump. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't even think a coherent thought. It was just pure animal fear. My foot instinctively lifted off the gas, and the Jeep started to slow. I was frozen, just staring into the woods, my brain refusing to process what my eyes were seeing. And then, just like that, it veered. It didn't slow down, it just changed direction and plunged deeper into the woods, vanishing into the shadows and the thick brush like it had never been there. The sound of its movement faded almost instantly. 1 second, it was this thunderous presence, and the next, there was nothing but the quiet hum of the Jeep's engine and the sound of my own blood pounding in my ears. I slammed on the brakes. The Jeep skidded a little in the soft sand of the trail and came to a stop. I just sat there, my hands glued to the steering wheel, my knuckles white. I was shaking all over, a fine, uncontrollable tremor that started in my hands and ran through my whole body. I felt cold, even though the sun was still warm on my arm. I kept staring into the woods where it had disappeared, half expecting it to come crashing back out. The silence was deafening. It was heavier and more menacing than the noise had been. I don't know how long I sat there, a minute, 5. Time got all weird. My mind was racing, trying to find a logical explanation. A bear? No. Bears don't run upright like that. Not for that long, not that fast. And they sure as hell aren't that tall. A person in a costume, out here, in the middle of nowhere, moving like that. It was impossible. The sheer unnatural size and speed of it ruled out everything normal. I had to know. The fear was still a live wire in my gut, but a desperate, morbid curiosity took over. I had to see something, some proof that I wasn't completely losing my mind. I put the Jeep in park, my hand shaking so bad I fumbled with the gear shift. I didn't turn the engine off. The idea of being stuck out there in silence was too terrifying. I climbed out, my legs feeling like jelly. The ground felt unsteady. I walked around the front of the Jeep, my eyes scanning the edge of the woods, that wall of green and shadow. I was hyper-aware of every sound, a bird chirping, the rustle of a squirrel in the leaves. Everything felt like a threat. I moved toward the left side of the trail, to the spot where I'd seen it running parallel to me. The ground there is mostly sand, pale and soft, and that's when I saw it. A print. It was sunk deep into the sand, fresh and clear. It wasn't a bear print. It was huge, way bigger than my hand. It was sort of boxy but long, and what made my blood run cold was that at the front I could see 2 clear, thick toe impressions. They weren't dainty. They were like 2 big, blunt toes. The rest of the print was a deep, heavy depression, like whatever made it weighed a ton. I just stood there, staring down at it. My mouth was dry. This was real. It was really real. I fumbled in my pocket for my phone. My husband. I had to call my husband. He'd know what to do. He'd come out here and see this, and what, I didn't know. I just needed someone else to see it. But my phone had no service. Of course it didn't. You never get service back on this part of the trail. A wave of panic washed over me. I was alone out here with this thing, and I had proof, but I had no way to show anyone. I thought, maybe I can take a picture anyway. At least I'd have it for when I got back to the house. I raised my phone, my hands still trembling, trying to frame the shot. The sun was glaring on the screen. I took a step to the side to get a better angle, my boots scuffing the sand. And that's when it happened. My heart just dropped into my stomach. A breeze, just a gentle little gust, nothing out of the ordinary, swept down the trail. It picked up the fine, dry sand from the edge of the print. I watched, helpless, as the wind delicately, almost mockingly, feathered across the surface of the impression. The sharp edges of the toes began to blur. The deep wall of the print started to crumble inward. I lunged forward, like I could stop it, waving my hands stupidly, but it was no use. In less than a minute, the print was gone. It was just a smeared, indistinct depression in the sand. Unrecognizable, useless. The evidence had literally blown away in front of my eyes. I felt a sob catch in my throat. It was a mixture of terror and this profound, crushing frustration. The one tangible thing, the one piece of proof that could have made someone believe me, was gone. I was left with nothing but the memory. This vivid, horrifying image burned into my brain. I scrambled back into the Jeep, slammed the door, and locked it, which felt so pathetic and pointless. I threw it into reverse and backed up the trail faster than I should have, the tires spinning, spraying sand. I didn't stop until I was back in my own driveway, the house looking safe and normal and a world away from the woods. That was the big one, the encounter that changed everything, but it wasn't the only one. That's the part that really gets to me, the part that makes me keep the curtains closed now. A few years after the Jeep incident, I started seeing other things, smaller things. I'd be out on the back deck in the evening having a coffee, and I'd catch a movement in my peripheral vision. I'd turn my head, and there, just at the tree line, maybe 50 yards away, I'd see a smaller, dark, upright figure. It would be there for a split second, just a silhouette darting from one tree to another, and then it would be gone. It was too fast to get a good look, but the shape was always the same, bipedal, dark, and moving with an unsettling quickness. It was never alone. It felt like there were more than one. And the sounds, God, the sounds, they started a year or so after that. It's always at night, usually in the late summer or fall. It sounds like a woman screaming, but it's not a human scream. It's got this weird warbling quality to it, this echo that seems to come from everywhere at once. It's a long, piercing shriek that cuts through the night and makes the hair on my arms stand straight up. The first time I heard it, I almost called the police, thinking someone was being attacked out in the woods, but it's followed by this profound, heavy silence. No commotion, no voices, nothing, just that one awful scream, and then quiet. I've heard it enough times now to know what it is, or I think I know. My husband thinks it's a fisher cat or a fox. He's a practical man. He humored me about the Jeep story, especially since I had no proof, but he writes the other stuff off as my imagination or normal woodland animals. He doesn't feel the dread I feel. He doesn't see the way the dog refuses to go outside after dark, how it whines and paces by the door, its ears flat against its head. I don't argue with him anymore. What's the point? But I've made changes. I hung heavy blackout curtains on every window that faces the woods. I never ever go outside after the sun goes down. Not to take out the trash, not to look at the stars, nothing. If I have to leave the house at night, I sprint from the door to my car and lock the doors immediately. My heart hammers the whole time. That day in the Jeep feels like a lifetime ago, but it also feels like it just happened. I can still close my eyes and see that dark, hulking figure moving with that jarring, unbalanced run, a creature that shouldn't exist, moving through a world it was never supposed to share with me. I saw it for maybe 4 seconds. But those 4 seconds rewired my entire brain. They introduced a fear that never really goes away, a low-grade hum of anxiety that's just part of my life now. It's the knowledge that the woods behind my house, the woods I used to love, aren't just woods anymore. They're a place where something else lives, something tall and dark and fast, something that left a print in the sand that vanished before I could show anyone, leaving me alone with a secret that feels too big to carry. Story 7. It was my 20th summer working fire lookouts in Glacier, and I thought I'd seen everything the park could throw at me. I was stationed at Numa Ridge that year. The tower's an old friend, you know. You get used to the solitude, the way the wind sings through the struts, the feeling of being the only person for miles. I was a skeptic, through and through. 20 years of listening to guys talk about weird noises and shadows, and I'd never seen a thing that couldn't be explained by a bear, a trick of the light, or just plain loneliness. The day it started was a Tuesday, I'm sure of it, because the supply truck had come up the day before, a Monday, and I was still sorting through the new groceries. It was one of those perfect, clear August days where you can see every peak and every valley laid out like God's own map. The air was so still, you could hear a pine needle drop. That's why the movement caught my eye. Down in this remote meadow, a place that doesn't even have a proper trail leading to it, I saw two figures. I grabbed my binoculars. My first thought was poachers, or maybe some idiot hikers who'd gotten hopelessly lost. But they were big, really big. And they were digging. Not like a person digs with a shovel, but with this powerful sweeping motion of their arms, throwing dark clumps of earth behind them. They were covered in dark hair, but it didn't move like bear fur. It was just part of them. A guy named Mark, a seasonal ranger I knew in passing, was visiting me that afternoon, dropping off some paperwork. I pointed them out to him. "You see that?" I said, my voice lower than I meant it to be. He took the binocs and was quiet for a long time. "What in the hell are they?" he finally whispered. We watched them for maybe 10 minutes, just digging. There was something so purposeful about it, so intent. It wasn't random. They were working. Mark left not long after, looking spooked, and the rest of the daylight hours dragged on. I kept checking the meadow, but they were gone. The unease they left behind, though, that stayed. It was a low hum in my blood, a feeling that the rules of my world had just been quietly rewritten. Night fell hard and fast in the mountains. I did my rounds, wrote my log, tried to read a book, but I couldn't focus. The tower felt different. It's always a little creaky, but tonight every sound was a threat. I must have fallen asleep in my chair because the first sound jolted me awake so violently I nearly fell out of it. Whack! It wasn't a branch. Branches go swish crack. This was a solid, heavy, deliberate impact. The whole tower shuddered. I was frozen, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought they'd break. Whack! This one was harder, lower down, near the base. The floor vibrated under my boots. I remember the cold feeling that washed over me, a sweat that was pure ice. This wasn't an animal. An animal bumps into things, scratches. This was a signal, an announcement. I crept to the window, peering down into the absolute blackness beneath the tower. I couldn't see a thing. That's when the sounds started. It began as a low, guttural chatter, like two people talking, but the language, it was nothing I'd ever heard. It was full of clicks and grunts, but woven into it were English words. I heard down and here and man. They weren't just saying the words, they were using them, placing them in the flow of that alien speech. It was wrong. It was like hearing a recording of a human voice played backwards and shredded. The hair on my arms and the back of my neck stood straight up. My breath was coming in short, ragged gasps, and I had to clamp a hand over my own mouth to keep from making a sound. Then the talking stopped, and the crying started. It was a baby. I swear to God it was the sound of a human infant, wailing in pure, pitiful misery. It was coming from right below the deck, a heartbreaking, helpless sob. My instincts screamed at me to help, to rush down there, but my legs were locked. Something in the back of my brain, the part that's kept me alive for 20 years in the backcountry, was screaming louder. It's a trick. It's not real. The crying went on for what felt like an hour, that awful, hopeless sound in the middle of the silent, star-filled night. Then it cut off, replaced by a deep, rhythmic sniffing sound. It was sniffing the air around the base of the tower, sniffing for me. That's when the terror truly peaked. I heard a heavy, scraping weight on the outside stairs. Something was climbing up. The metal stairs groaned under a weight they were never meant to hold. I backed away from the door, my eyes fixed on the square of blackness that was the window next to it. And then they were there. Two faces filled the window, not pressed against it, just there, looking in. They were framed in thick, matted, dark brown hair. But the eyes, I will never forget the eyes. They were huge and blacker than the night sky, and they had this faint, sickly greenish-yellow glow from within, like old phosphorus. There was no white, no pupil, just these vast, liquid, glowing black pools, and they were looking right at me. The feeling that came off them wasn't curiosity. It wasn't the dumb stare of a bear. It was a malevolent, intelligent presence. It was a look of assessment, of cold, calculating recognition. They knew I was in here. They knew I was afraid, and they were letting me know that they knew. My body moved on pure animal instinct. I stumbled backwards to my bunk, my hands fumbling for the shotgun I keep propped in the corner. My fingers were numb, clumsy. I finally got a grip on it, the cold metal of the barrel a shocking anchor to reality. I turned back towards the window, the faces still watching me, and I racked the slide. Chunk. The sound was obscenely loud in the small cabin. The moment the sound echoed in the room, the two faces vanished. Not a slow retreat. They were just gone. I heard two heavy, thudding impacts on the ground far below, followed by the sound of something massive crashing through the underbrush, moving away from the tower at an impossible speed. The silence that rushed back in was almost as terrifying as the noises. I stood there, shaking so hard I could barely stand, the shotgun still pointed at the empty window. I didn't move for a long, long time. I just listened. Nothing. The forest had gone dead quiet again. No insects, no wind, nothing. When the first hint of grey light began to tinge the eastern sky, a courage born of sheer desperation finally pushed me to move. I had to see. I had to know. I loaded a shell into the chamber, my hands still trembling, and slowly, slowly cracked open the door. The cool morning air smelled of pine and damp earth. It smelled normal. It was a lie. I crept down the stairs, my shotgun leading the way, expecting an ambush with every step. There was no one there, but they'd left things. The first thing I saw was a log, a huge, thick pine log, maybe 15 feet long. It was leaned up against the deck railing, its top end resting just below the cabin floor. It wasn't fallen there. It had been placed. It was a ladder. My blood ran cold. They hadn't just been trying to scare me, they had been trying to get in. I shined my flashlight around the base of the tower, and the beam caught something on one of the wooden support posts. It was a carving. It was fresh, the exposed wood still pale and smelling of sap. It wasn't random scratches. It was a symbol, a map. My heart sank into my stomach as I studied it. It was clearly a depiction of the meadow where I'd seen them digging. There was a specific spot marked with a series of concentric circles, and in the center of those circles was a crude but unmistakable carving of a human-like skull. The meaning hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just a warning, it was a statement. It was a map to where they buried their things, their trophies, the missing hikers, the ones whose disappearances were always a mystery. They weren't all accidents. Some of them ended up in that meadow, a cold, pure rage mixed with my terror. I couldn't leave this here. I couldn't let it exist. I ran back up the tower, grabbed my axe, and came back down. I swung at that post like a madman, hacking and chopping until the symbol was completely obliterated, nothing but a mass of splinters and wood chips. I was crying, I think. Tears of sheer, unadulterated panic and fury. I dragged the heavy log away from the tower, rolling it down the slight incline until it disappeared into the trees. As soon as the sun was fully up, I packed my essentials. I didn't care about procedure. I didn't care about my gear. I threw a pack together, got in my truck, and I drove. I didn't stop until I was out of the park, out of the state. I called my supervisor from a payphone and quit. No notice, no explanation. I just said I was done. I never went back. I sold my house in Montana and moved to a city, somewhere with lots of people and lights, where the nights are never truly dark or quiet, but I still see those faces in my dreams, those huge, glowing black eyes, full of a knowledge that feels ancient and cruel. They weren't animals. They were intelligent. They understood tools. They understood deception with that crying. They understood what a gun was, and that carving, that map. They were showing me that they hunt, that they bury what they catch. I am convinced, down to the marrow of my bones, that these things are hominids, a kind of people that stayed in the shadows, and they are cunning, and they mean harm. The chills never really left me. I still sleep with the lights on, and sometimes on a quiet night, if I listen too hard, I can still hear the echo of that pitiful, fake baby's cry, and I know, with a certainty that haunts me, that they're still out there. Story 8. I still don't like talking about this, even now, years later. My hands are a little shaky just typing it out, but I guess if I'm ever going to tell someone, it might as well be here, with people who might actually believe me. It was late October, a Friday. I'd had a crap week at work and just needed to get away from everything for a night. No phone, no people, just me and my tent. I'd chosen this spot not too far from the Kingsbury Ordnance Plant in Indiana. I know, an ordnance plant sounds like a weird place to go for peace and quiet, but the land around it is actually pretty secluded. It's all these dense woods and old trails that not many people use anymore. I'd been there once before with a buddy a couple years back, and we hadn't seen a soul. It seemed perfect. I got there just as the sun was starting to go down, maybe around 5 in the afternoon. The air was getting that real autumn chill, the kind that makes you glad you packed a good sleeping bag. I remember the smell of damp leaves and pine, and the absolute silence. It was so quiet, it was almost loud, you know? I parked my truck off a dirt forestry road, shouldered my backpack, and hiked in about a mile to a small clearing I remembered near a creek. Setting up the tent was the usual hassle. The ground was harder than I thought, and I had to really lean on the stakes to get them in. I got a small fire going, cooked a couple of hot dogs on a stick, and just sat there watching the flames. It was peaceful. For a few hours, everything was exactly what I needed. The stars came out, bright and clear away from the city lights. I remember feeling pretty good, like I'd made the right choice. The first thing that felt off was the silence. It just stopped. The crickets, the little rustles in the leaves, the occasional owl hoot. It all just cut out. It was so sudden it was like someone had flipped a switch. I sat up straighter, listening. Nothing, just the crackle of my fire. I figured maybe a coyote was passing through, or a deer. Something big enough to make the smaller stuff shut up. I wasn't scared, just alert. Then I heard the first rustle. It was over to my left, in the thickest part of the woods beyond the creek. It wasn't a small animal rustle. This was a heavy, deliberate sound, like something big was pushing its way through the undergrowth. I stood up, my spine straight as a rod. "Hello?" I called out. My voice sounded too loud in the dead quiet. No answer, just another rustle, closer this time. Then a low grunt. It was a deep, wet sound, like a pig, but bigger. Deeper in the chest, a cold knot started to form in my stomach. This wasn't a deer. I know what deer sound like. This was different. "Hey!" I yelled, trying to sound tougher than I felt. "I've got a gun! You better get out of here!" It was a bluff. I didn't have a gun. The most I had was a big hunting knife on my belt, but I was hoping whatever it was would just be a person, and the threat would scare them off. The rustling stopped for a second. I held my breath, hoping it had worked. Then the grunt came again, and this time it sounded pissed off. It was closer, maybe just on the other side of the creek now, still hidden in the shadows. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I could feel the pulse in my neck. This was bad. This was really bad. I backed up towards my tent, my eyes glued to the tree line. I fumbled for my big Maglite flashlight and clicked it on, sweeping the beam across the dark wall of trees. The light just made the shadows deeper, more menacing. I couldn't see anything. Then it happened. Something flew out of the darkness. It wasn't thrown like a person throws a baseball. It was launched. A heavy piece of log, maybe 3 feet long and thick as my leg, landed with a huge thud in the middle of my clearing, not 10 feet from me. Dirt and leaves sprayed up from the impact. I actually yelped and jumped back. My brain couldn't process it. Who throws a log? Before I could even think, another one came flying out, this one clipping the edge of my fire and sending a shower of sparks into the air. Then a third object, a whole goddamn tree stump, roots and all, landed right where I'd been sitting just a minute before. It would have crushed me. That's when the fear went from a cold knot to a full-blown, icy terror. This wasn't a person. No person is that strong. I was shaking so hard I could barely hold the flashlight. My mouth was dry as dust. "Please," I shouted, my voice cracking, "just leave me alone." The rustling started again, and then I saw it. Down the trail that led out of my clearing, maybe 50 yards away, something stepped out from behind a big oak tree. My flashlight beam caught it, and my blood went cold. It was huge. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing absolutely dwarfed me. It had to be 9 feet tall, easy. It was just standing there, broad-shouldered and covered in dark, matted hair. It wasn't a bear. Bears don't stand like that. They don't have those proportions. This thing was built like a man, but a massive, powerful man, covered in shaggy fur. I couldn't see its face clearly, just a dark shape under the shadow of its brow, but I could feel it looking right at me. We stood there for what felt like an hour, but it was probably only a few seconds. Me, frozen, solid, flashlight beam trembling on this figure. It didn't move, it just stared. Then it tilted its head back, opened its mouth, and let out a sound I will hear in my grave. It wasn't a roar, it wasn't a howl, it was a scream. A high, piercing, blood-chilling scream that seemed to tear right through the air and into my soul. It was full of rage and hate and something else, something ancient and wild. It was the most horrifying sound I have ever heard in my life. It felt like it went on forever, echoing through the trees, and during that scream, every hair on my body stood straight up. I felt a primal fear, the kind your ancestors felt when they were prey. I wasn't a man with a job and a truck anymore. I was just an animal that was about to be killed. The scream stopped. The thing took a step towards me. That broke the spell. I dropped the flashlight. I didn't even think about it. My body just took over. I spun around and I ran. I didn't run towards the trail it was on. I ran in the opposite direction, crashing blindly into the woods. Branches whipped at my face and tore at my clothes. I couldn't see a thing. It was pitch black. I just ran, fueled by pure, unthinking terror. I fell almost immediately, tripping over a root, scrambling back to my feet without even feeling the pain, and kept running. And that's when I heard the footsteps. They were heavy, so heavy. Thump, thump, thump. Each one was a solid impact on the forest floor, and they were keeping pace with me. I wasn't getting away. It was right there behind me, crashing through the trees just like I was, but with a power and speed I couldn't match. I could hear it breathing, these great huffing grunts right on my heels. I've never been so scared. My lungs were burning, my legs were like jelly, but I didn't dare stop. I could smell it too, a thick, musky, foul smell, like wet dog and rotten meat, that filled the air around me. It was so strong it made me gag even as I was running for my life. I don't know how long I ran. It felt like forever. My only thought was to get back to my truck. I had no idea if I was going the right way. I was just running in a blind panic. The sound of those footsteps and that awful smell, my only companions. Then, through a break in the trees, I saw a sliver of grey. The dirt road. I put on a burst of speed I didn't know I had, bursting out of the tree line and onto the road. I didn't look back. I just ran down the middle of the road, my boots pounding on the hard-packed dirt. I could still hear the footsteps, but they weren't in the woods anymore. They were just off the road, paralleling me, hidden in the dark. It was still following me. I saw my truck up ahead, a dark shape in the moonlight. I fumbled for my keys in my pocket, sobbing with relief and terror. I ripped the door open, threw myself inside and slammed the lock down. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key into the ignition. I turned it, the engine roared to life, and I slammed it into drive, spinning the tires and spraying gravel. I didn't turn on the headlights until I was a quarter mile down the road. I just drove, white-knuckling the steering wheel, my entire body trembling. I kept checking the rearview mirror, expecting to see that dark shape chasing me down the road, but there was nothing, just empty, dark road. I drove straight home, an hour-and-a-half drive without stopping. I didn't even realize I was still in my muddy, torn clothes until I was standing in my own kitchen under the bright fluorescent lights, trying to pour a glass of water and spilling it everywhere because my hands wouldn't stop shaking. The next morning, in the cold light of day, the fear was still there, a solid lump in my chest. I had to go back. My wallet was in my tent, my backpack with my stuff. I couldn't just leave it all there. I called a friend, didn't tell him what happened, just said I'd had a scare with an animal and didn't want to go back alone. He agreed to meet me. We drove out there around noon. The woods looked completely different in the sunlight. Normal, peaceful. It felt impossible that the night before had even happened. We hiked in, me leading the way, my heart in my throat the whole time. We found the clearing. My fire was just a circle of cold ash. The logs and the stump were still there, lying where they'd landed. And my tent was destroyed. It wasn't just knocked over, it was shredded. The nylon was torn to ribbons, like it had been clawed apart. The aluminum poles were snapped in half. My sleeping bag was ripped open, the stuffing pulled out. My backpack was tossed into a tree, hanging from a branch 10 feet off the ground. It looked like a bomb had gone off. My friend just stared, his mouth hanging open. "What the hell happened here, man?" he asked. I couldn't answer him. I just stood there, looking at the wreckage. I looked over at the trail where I'd seen it. The trail was empty now, just dappled sunlight on the leaves. But in the mud, right where the thing had been standing, I saw a single, huge footprint. It was long and wide, with 5 distinct toes. It was sunk deep into the mud. It wasn't a bear print. I know what a bear print looks like. This was different. I never went back to that area. Not ever. I still go camping, but I stick to crowded official campsites now. I don't go into the deep woods alone. Sometimes, years later, I'll have a nightmare. I'm back in that clearing, the fire is dying and the silence drops. I hear the rustling, the grunt, and then I see it step out onto the trail. It stands there, a dark giant against the trees, and it tilts its head back. I wake up in a cold sweat just before it screams. I don't know what it was. I don't care what people call it. All I know is that it was real. It was there, and it wanted me to know I wasn't welcome. And that scream, I will never ever forget that sound. It's burned into my mind. It's the sound of something that doesn't belong in our world, something old and angry that lives in the dark places we've forgotten about. And I still can't explain it. Story 9. I live out in the middle of nowhere in Illinois. Not like a suburb, I mean proper rural. My property backs up on a big stretch of state forest, just miles and miles of trees and hills. It's quiet, or it was anyway. I've got a few horses, that's my life. My barn, my corral, my animals. It's a simple life, and I liked it that way. This happened on a Tuesday evening, about 3 weeks ago. It was late September, so the days were getting shorter. The sun had just gone down, maybe 20-30 minutes before. It was that time of day where it's not quite dark, but it's not light either. Everything's just shades of grey and blue. I'd just finished feeding the horses, my 2 Mays, Daisy and Clover, and my old gelding, Jack. I'd put them in the corral for the night. It's a good, strong corral. 6-foot-high wooden post and rail fencing with a heavy, sliding metal gate. I built a lot of it myself. I'm proud of it. It keeps the horses safe from coyotes and the occasional loose dog. I was walking back towards the house, maybe 100 feet away, when I heard it. It wasn't a normal sound. It was a heavy, solid thump, like someone dropping a big sack of feed on the ground, but it came from the direction of the corral. I stopped walking and turned around. The corral was just a dark shape in the fading light. I couldn't see anything wrong. I figured maybe one of the horses had kicked the fence or something, but it didn't sound right. A horse kick is sharper, more hollow. This was a dense, weighty sound. Then I heard it again. Thump. And then I heard the horses. They weren't whinnying. It was worse than that. It was this low, nervous blowing sound they make, a sort of huff, huff, huff from their nostrils. I could see their shapes moving restlessly, shifting around in a tight group. They were scared. Really scared. That put me on edge instantly. Horses don't spook at nothing. My flashlight was in my hand, a big, heavy maglite I always carry after dark. I clicked it on and swung the beam towards the corral. At first, I didn't see anything. Just the rails of the fence, the dusty ground inside, the wide, frightened eyes of my horses reflecting the light. They were all huddled together on the far side, away from the tree line. I swept the beam along the outside of the fence, towards the woods, and that's when I saw it. It was crouched down by the corner of the corral, right where the fence meets the big oak tree. My brain didn't process it at first. It was just a massive, dark shape, way too big to be a person. I thought for a second it was a bear, but we don't get black bears around here, not really, and the shape was all wrong. It was upright, even while crouching. I held the light on it, my hand starting to shake. The thing was huge. I mean, just impossibly big. It had to be 7, maybe 8 feet tall if it stood up. It was covered in what looked like long, shaggy hair, dark brown or black. It was hard to tell in the light. It was facing the fence, so I was seeing its back and profile, and it was pushing on the fence, not trying to break it, not in a rage. It was testing it. It had one of its hands, and God, they were hands, not paws, wrapped around the top rail of my 6-foot fence like you or I would hold a railing. It was pushing its weight against it back and forth, like it was checking how sturdy it was. The whole section of fence was groaning with the pressure. Each push produced that low thump I'd heard. My breath caught in my throat. I was frozen. I couldn't even scream. I just stood there, 50 feet away, with this flashlight beam shaking all over this thing. It must have known I was there. The light was right on it. But it didn't turn around. It just kept working on the fence. Then it shifted its grip and started pushing on one of the vertical support posts. The wood creaked, a sound I'd never heard from my fence before. It was strong, unbelievably strong. That's when I found my voice. It came out as a weak, strangled yell. "Hey, get away from there!" It stopped pushing. It went perfectly still. Slowly, so slowly, it turned its head to look at me over its shoulder. I still didn't see its whole face, just the side of its head, a heavy brow ridge, and one eye that caught the flashlight beam. It wasn't a bear's eye. It was deep set and intelligent. It didn't look scared. It didn't look angry. It looked curious, assessing. Then it turned its head back to the fence, completely ignoring me. It was like I was a minor annoyance, a gnat. The disrespect of it, the sheer dismissal, sent a fresh wave of cold fear through me. This thing wasn't afraid of me, not at all. It stood up. My heart just about stopped. It was so much taller than I'd guessed. It had to be way over 8 feet. The sheer mass of it was staggering. It blocked out the trees behind it. It took a step back from the fence, and that's when I got a better look at its hands. They were huge, like dinner plates, with long, thick fingers, and on the ends of those fingers were nails. They weren't claws. They were flat black nails, almost like a person's, but thick and hard-looking. It reached down and picked something up from the ground. It was a branch, a fallen limb from the oak tree. It was about as thick as my forearm and maybe 4 feet long. This thing held it in one hand like it was a twig. It looked from the branch to the corral, and then its head tilted, and I swear, it looked right at me. It was gauging my reaction. I know it was. Then, with a casual, underhand toss, it threw the branch over the 6-foot fence into the corral. It landed with a crash in the middle of the pen, scattering dirt and dust. The horses went crazy, scrambling and snorting, pressing themselves against the far rails. The thing just stood there, watching them. Then it slowly turned its head and looked at me again. It was waiting. It was waiting to see what I would do. That was the most terrifying part. This wasn't some mindless animal. This was a creature that was thinking, planning. It was testing the fence's strength, and now it was testing me. It was seeing how I'd react, how the horses would react. It felt like an experiment. I was paralyzed. My mind was screaming at me to run, to get my gun, to do something, but my body wouldn't listen. I just stood there, holding this stupid flashlight, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my teeth. It watched me for another few seconds, and then it made a sound. It wasn't a roar. It was a low, deep grunt, almost a chuckle. It sounded amused. It was enjoying this. It was enjoying my fear. That sound broke my paralysis. Anger mixed with the fear. This thing was messing with my home, with my animals. I raised the flashlight higher, pointing the beam right at its face. "Get out of here!" I screamed, my voice cracking. "Go on, get!" For a second, it didn't move. The light was shining right in its eyes, and it just stared back at me, completely unblinking. Its eyes were a deep liquid brown. There was no monster there, no demon. There was just a presence, an ancient, powerful awareness that looked right back into me and saw nothing to be afraid of. Then it turned. It didn't run. It didn't make a sound. It just turned and walked with this unnaturally smooth, silent gait towards the tree line. It moved between 2 big pines and was gone. Just like that. 1 second it was there, a massive, impossible shape in my flashlight beam, and the next, there was nothing but the dark, silent woods. I stood there for, I don't know how long, maybe 5 minutes, just shining the light at the spot where it disappeared. The only sounds were the frantic blowing of my horses and the blood roaring in my ears. The woods were dead quiet, no crickets, no frogs, nothing. It was like the forest itself was holding its breath. When I finally got my legs to work, I ran to the house. I didn't even check the corral first. I just ran inside, locked the door and leaned against it, sliding down to the floor. I sat there in the dark, listening for over an hour. I was too scared to even turn on a light. The next morning, when the sun was fully up, I went back out there, my shotgun in my hands. The horses were still skittish, but they were okay. I went to the corner of the corral, to the spot where it had been. The ground was all messed up. There were deep impressions in the dirt, footprints. I've seen big deer tracks. I've seen coyote tracks. These were nothing like that. They were human-shaped, but massive. I got a tape measure from my toolbox. From the back of the heel to the tip of the longest toe, they were 16 inches long. 16 inches. I laid my own boot next to one. My size 11 boot looked like a child's toy. And the fence, the top rail where it had been gripping it, was splintered. The wood was actually cracked from the pressure. The vertical post it had been pushing on was leaning inward, and the ground around its base was disturbed, like it had been rocked back and forth in the soil. I spent the rest of that day reinforcing the fence, adding extra braces, driving new posts deeper. My hands were shaking the whole time. Every time a bird would call from the woods, I'd jump and grab my gun. I haven't seen it since, but I know it's out there. I can feel it sometimes when I'm locking up the barn for the night, a feeling of being watched from the tree line. The woods have felt different ever since. They don't feel peaceful anymore. They feel occupied. I don't know what it wanted. I don't know if it was trying to get to the horses or if it was just curious. But I do know it wasn't afraid of me. It looked at me like I was the one in the cage, and it was the one on the outside, just testing the locks, and I have no idea what would have happened if those locks had failed. Story 10. It was one of those perfect autumn days in the Adirondacks, the kind that makes you forget winter is even a thing. The air had that crisp, clean bite to it, but the sun was warm on your face. My husband, my ex-husband now, but he was my whole world back then, had this idea to hike up Prospect Mountain. We were living in a little rented cabin near Lake George, just the two of us trying to make a go of it. We were young, you know? You think you're invincible. We started up Rangers Road in the afternoon. It wasn't a super tough hike, more of a wide, gravelly road that snakes its way up the mountain. We were just talking, laughing, being stupid together. I remember what I was wearing. These faded blue jeans and a thick cream-colored sweater my mom had knitted for me. He had on this red plaid jacket that was too thin for the weather, and I kept teasing him about it. The sun started to go down earlier than we'd figured. That's the thing about the mountains in the fall. One minute you're squinting in the sunlight, the next you're noticing how long the shadows are getting. We decided to turn around. We weren't even at the top, but we weren't prepared to be up there in the dark. We had one flashlight between us, one of those big, heavy metal ones that eats D-cell batteries. That's when I first heard it. It wasn't a loud sound, not at first, just a single crunch off to our left, in the thick of the woods, the kind of sound a deer might make stepping on a branch. I nudged him and said, "Hey, listen, a deer." We both stopped and peered into the trees. The light was fading fast, turning the forest into a wall of grey and black shapes. We didn't see anything. We started walking again, and as soon as our boots crunched on the gravel, we heard it again. Another crunch, from the same general area. It was keeping pace with us. We stopped dead, and the second we went silent, the sound in the woods stopped too. It was absolute, total quiet. No wind, no birds, nothing. Just this heavy, waiting silence. My husband, he tried to play it cool. Probably just a bear, honey. They're curious. But his voice was a little too high. We started walking faster. Our boots were making a racket on the gravel now, a real hurry-up kind of sound. And from the woods, the sound matched our pace. It wasn't just a single crunch every now and then. It was a series of them, a steady crunch, 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 moving parallel to the road, maybe 30, 40 feet in. The thing was, it sounded heavy. A deer is light on its feet. A bear, too, for its size. This sounded solid, like whatever was stepping on those sticks and leaves had real weight to it. Substantial weight. I grabbed my husband's arm, my fingers digging into the sleeve of his stupid thin jacket. I could feel the muscle in his arm was tense, rigid. He was scared, too. We didn't say a word. We just walked faster, our eyes glued to the dark line of the trees. We couldn't see a thing in there. It was like a solid mass of shadow. Then we tried an experiment. We slowed down to an almost tiptoe. The footsteps in the woods slowed to match. A slow, deliberate crunch, pause, crunch. We stopped completely, holding our breath. The footsteps stopped. The silence felt even heavier than before, like a physical pressure on my eardrums. I remember my heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my throat, a frantic, fluttering pulse. My husband whispered, "Okay, this isn't right." That was the understatement of the century. He clicked on the flashlight. The beam was weak, yellow, and it didn't pierce more than 15 feet into the woods before it was swallowed by the darkness. He swept it back and forth. Nothing, just tree trunks and the tangled undergrowth. As soon as that beam of light hit the trees, we heard a low, guttural sound. It wasn't a growl, not like a dog or a bear. It was deeper, more of a rumble, a huff, like a huge, annoyed animal letting out a breath. It came from the exact spot the footsteps had been. The sound went right through me. It felt primitive. It felt intelligent, not like the dumb grunt of a pig or something. This felt like a sound of assessment, of warning. He snapped the light off. "Let's just go," he said, and his voice was tight. "Don't run. Just walk fast. Don't look like prey." So we did. We power walked down that mountain road, and the thing in the woods kept pace with us. The sound of its movement was constant now, a relentless crashing accompaniment to our own frantic footsteps. It wasn't trying to be quiet anymore. It was letting us know it was there. It was letting us know it could keep up without even trying. That was the worst part, I think, the relentlessness of it. It wasn't charging us. It wasn't roaring. It was just following, stalking. For over an hour it stayed with us. An hour is a long time when you're that terrified. Your mind starts to go to places you don't want it to. I started imagining what it looked like. I pictured huge, hairy shoulders pushing through saplings. I pictured long, powerful arms. I kept thinking about its eyes and what they might look like, and if they were looking at me right then. My hand was clamped onto my husband's arm so tight my fingers went numb. I wasn't just holding on for comfort. I was holding on because I was afraid if I let go, I would just fall apart, or I'd be pulled away from him into the darkness. I kept looking back over my shoulder, but there was nothing to see, just the empty road behind us and the wall of black trees on either side. The smell hit us then. It came in a wave on a slight breeze. It's a smell I'll never, ever forget. It was a mix of things, like a dead animal that's been left in the sun, a sweet, sickly rot. But underneath that was a musky, wet dog smell, and something else, something earthy and foul, like old, damp soil and shit. It was so strong it made my eyes water. We both gagged at the same time. He pulled the collar of his jacket up over his nose. I buried my face in the shoulder of my sweater. The smell seemed to make the thing more real, more physical than the sounds ever could. It wasn't just a noise in the woods anymore. It was a massive, living, breathing, stinking creature that was close enough for us to smell it. We were practically jogging now, our breath puffing out in ragged white clouds in the cold air. My legs were burning, and I had a stitch in my side, but I didn't dare slow down. The crashing in the woods was right there, just off the shoulder, so loud I thought it might burst out onto the road at any second. Then we saw the lights. Way down below, through a break in the trees, we saw the tiny, distant lights of the town around Lake George. It was the most beautiful, relieving sight I have ever seen. It was like a promise of safety. "We're almost there," my husband gasped, his voice raw. The car's just at the edge of the woods, where the parking lot is. The forest started to thin out. The big, old-growth pines gave way to younger, skinnier trees. The road began to level out. We were almost running, our lungs on fire. The thing in the woods was keeping up, but its progress sounded different now, more frantic. The crashes were louder, more agitated, like it was pushing through brush. It didn't want to go through. We broke out of the tree line. One moment we were in the tunnel of darkness. The next, we were in the open air of the small gravel parking area. Our beat-up old Chevy was sitting there under a lone, dim security light, looking like a sanctuary. We didn't stop. We fumbled for the keys, our hands shaking so badly he could barely get the key in the lock. He finally got the door open, and we practically fell into the front seat, scrambling to get the doors locked. We sat there for a second, just panting, staring out the windshield at the dark line of the forest we'd just escaped. The woods were silent. The relentless crashing had stopped. The footsteps were gone. It was over. We just sat there, breathing hard, not saying a word. I was trembling all over, a fine, uncontrollable shake that started deep in my bones. I looked at my husband. His face was pale and slick with sweat, his eyes wide and fixed on the trees. Then, from right at the edge of the tree line, just inside the darkness where the light from the parking lot didn't reach, we heard it one last time. It was that same low, rumbling huff. But this one was different. It wasn't a sound of assessment. It was a sound of frustration, of anger. It was a deep, guttural exhalation that was full of pure, raw menace. It was the sound of something that had been cheated out of its prize. And then, nothing. We sat in that car for a long time, maybe 20 minutes, just staring at the woods. Nothing ever came out, nothing moved. It was just gone. We drove home in complete silence. We didn't talk about it that night. We didn't talk about it for a long time. It was like if we didn't say it out loud, it couldn't be real, but it was real. The fear was so deep, so physical, it had settled into my body. For years afterward, I couldn't go into the woods. I'd get panic attacks if I was in a place that was too quiet. It wasn't until many, many years later, after my marriage had ended and I'd moved away, that I was reading an article online about strange sightings in the Adirondacks. There was a section on Bigfoot, and people were describing the same things. The paralleling behavior, the stopping when they stopped, the moving when they moved, the overwhelming rotten smell. And that's when I knew with a cold certainty what had been in the woods with us that day on Prospect Mountain. It wasn't a bear, it wasn't a deer. It was something else, something that lives in the deep, dark places and doesn't like to be seen, something that followed two young, scared kids down a mountain for over an hour, just to let them know they weren't alone and they weren't safe. I still think about that sound sometimes, that last, angry huff from the edge of the darkness. It's been decades, but I can still hear it perfectly. I can still smell that god-awful smell, and I still sleep with a light on. Story 11. That day, it was a Tuesday, I think, late August, so the air was still warm, but starting to get that crisp edge as summer faded. I'd gotten home from work around 6, had dinner, and then decided to step outside for some fresh air. It was one of those evenings where the light was just starting to fade, that kind of golden hour glow that makes everything look soft and hazy. I remember leaning against the porch railing, sipping a beer, and just staring out at the tracks. I do that a lot. It's my way of unwinding. The trains don't run too often anymore, maybe once or twice a day, so most of the time it's just quiet up there. I was just standing there, letting my mind wander, when something caught my eye. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, maybe a shadow from the trees or something, but then I saw it move. There was this figure on the tracks, way off in the distance, maybe a couple 100 yards away. It was big, like really big, and hunched over. I squinted, thinking it might be a person, but the way it was moving didn't look right. People walk upright, you know? This thing was lumbering along, kind of swaying, with its arms hanging low. It was too far away to see details, but even from that distance, I could tell it was massive. My first thought was maybe it was a bear, but we don't get bears around here, not in this part of Ohio. And bears don't walk on two legs like that. I put my beer down on the railing, my heart starting to beat a little faster. I wasn't scared yet, just curious. I kept watching as it got closer, and with every step it seemed to grow in size. The light was still decent enough that I could make out its shape more clearly. It had to be at least 8 feet tall, maybe more, with a wide, thick chest and shoulders that looked bulky under what I realized was dark, almost black hair covering its body. It wasn't like any animal I'd ever seen. It was built like a man, but wrong, all hunched forward with this heavy, powerful gait. Its arms swung in a way that seemed too fluid, too animal-like, and it moved with a kind of purpose, like it knew where it was going. As it got closer, maybe 100 yards away now, I could see more details. The hair was matted and shaggy, covering everything except maybe its face, but I couldn't make that out from where I was. It didn't have any clothes on, nothing human about it beyond the basic shape. Its legs were thick, and it walked with a slight bend. like it was always ready to spring into action. I remember feeling a cold knot form in my stomach. This wasn't right. This wasn't something that belonged here. I've spent time in the woods. I've seen deer, raccoons, even coyotes, but this was different. This felt ancient, primal. I stood there frozen, my hands gripping the porch railing so tight, my knuckles turned white. The creature was maybe 70 yards away now, and I could hear the faint crunch of gravel under its feet. But it was so quiet, like it was trying not to make noise. That's when it stopped. It just halted in the middle of the tracks and turned its head slightly, as if it was listening or sniffing the air. I held my breath, afraid to move. For a second I thought it might have seen me, but I was standing in the shadow of the porch, so I hoped I was hidden. Then, without any warning, it broke into a sprint. I've never seen anything move that fast in my life. One moment it was standing there, and the next it was charging down the tracks like a freight train. Its speed was unreal. It covered dozens of yards in just a few seconds, its body low to the ground, arms pumping. The power in its movement was terrifying. It wasn't running like a human or even a big animal. It was smooth, effortless, like it was built for that kind of speed. My heart was hammering in my chest, and I felt this cold sweat break out on my forehead. I couldn't look away, even though every instinct was telling me to run inside and lock the door. It sprinted for maybe 10 or 15 seconds, and then, just as suddenly as it started, it leapt off the rails. It jumped, like really jumped, clearing the gravel embankment and landing in the brush below without a sound. 1 second it was there, a massive dark shape against the fading sky, and the next it was gone. Vanished into the woods. I stood there, staring at the spot where it had disappeared, waiting for some sound, a crash, a rustle, anything. But there was nothing. Just silence. The kind of silence that feels heavy, oppressive. Even the crickets had stopped chirping, like they were holding their breath too. My whole body was trembling now. I could feel my legs shaking, and I had to lean against the railing to steady myself. My stomach was churning, and I thought I might throw up. That thing, whatever it was, had moved with such raw power and speed that it didn't seem possible. It was like something out of a nightmare, but I was wide awake and I knew what I'd seen. The way it hunched forward, the width of its chest, the dark hair. It looked like a cross between a man and an ape, but not like any primate I've ever seen in documentaries. It was too big, too wild. I stayed out there for what felt like hours, just staring at the tracks and the woods, but it was probably only 10 or 15 minutes. The light was almost gone now, the sky turning a deep purple, and the shadows were lengthening. I kept expecting to see it again or to hear something, but there was nothing, no movement. No sound. It was as if the creature had never been there at all, but I knew it had. The image was burned into my brain. The way it moved, the sheer size of it, the effortless leap into the brush. Finally, I forced myself to go inside. My hands were still shaking as I locked the back door and drew the curtains. I sat down on the couch, my mind racing. What the hell was that? Was it a bear? No, bears don't run like that. And they sure as hell don't stand and walk on 2 legs with that kind of posture. Could it have been a person in a costume? That thought crossed my mind. But who would be out there on the train tracks in the middle of nowhere, dressed like that, and moving with that kind of speed? It didn't make sense. And the jump. It leaped maybe 10 feet down into thick brush and didn't make a sound. That's not human. I spent the rest of the night jumping at every little noise. The house felt different, smaller, like the walls couldn't keep whatever that was out. I kept peeking out the windows, half expecting to see it standing in my backyard, but there was nothing, just the dark shape of the trees and the silent tracks. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a large dog or a trick of the light. But I knew deep down that wasn't true. I'd seen it too clearly. The memory of its movement, that smooth, heavy gait turning into a sprint, was seared into me. The next day, I went out to look at the tracks. The sun was up and everything looked normal. The gravel was undisturbed, no footprints that I could see, no broken branches in the brush where it landed. It was like it had never been there, but I knew what I saw. I've replayed it in my head over and over, and every time I get that same sick feeling in my stomach. That creature, whatever it was, didn't belong in this world. It felt old, like something from a time before people, and seeing it there, in a place I thought I knew, changed something in me. I've always felt safe in my home, in my neighborhood. Now, every time I look out at those tracks, I feel a deep unease. It's not just fear, it's this nagging curiosity, this need to know what it was. But at the same time, I'm terrified of finding out. I've started avoiding the backyard after dark, and I keep the lights on at night. Sometimes, when I'm lying in bed, I think I hear something, a rustle in the woods, a heavy footstep. But when I listen, it's just the wind or my imagination. I've thought about telling people, but who would believe me? They'd think I was crazy or that I'd had too much to drink. But I know what I saw. That thing was real, and it was out there moving through the familiar landscapes around my home like it owned them. And the worst part is, I have no explanation, no way to make sense of it. It just happened. And now I'm left with this fear, this chill that won't go away. I keep waiting for something else to happen, for it to come back. But so far, nothing, just the memory, vivid and terrifying, like it happened yesterday. And I can't shake the feeling that it's still out there, watching, waiting. But for what? I have no idea. Story 12. All right, so I've been sitting on this for years, and I guess now's as good a time as any to get it off my chest. I've read a lot of stories on here that sound familiar, and it's making me feel less crazy about what happened to me. This was back in 2007. I was in my early 20s, and my buddy and I decided to go camping out in eastern Ohio, near some old strip mine areas. We'd heard about these ponds out there from a friend who said they were great for fishing, and we were dumb enough to think it'd be a fun, quiet weekend. Man, were we wrong. We drove out there on a Friday afternoon in late September. The leaves were starting to turn, and the air had that crisp feel that makes you want to be outside. We found a spot right by one of the ponds, with this huge high wall of rock and dirt looming over us. It was part of the old mining operation, just this massive sheer face that looked like it had been cut right out of the earth. The pond itself was dark and still, surrounded by thick woods that felt ancient and kind of heavy, like they'd seen a lot of things over the years. We set up our tent maybe 20 feet from the water's edge, close enough to hear it lapping if the wind picked up, but far enough that we didn't worry about flooding. My friend was a heavy sleeper, always had been, so I knew once he was out, it'd take a lot to wake him. We built a small fire, cooked some hot dogs, and shot the breeze for a while before turning in around 11. I remember feeling pretty relaxed, just listening to the crickets and the occasional owl hooting in the distance. Nothing out of the ordinary. I must have fallen asleep pretty fast, but I woke up suddenly sometime later. My watch said it was just after 4 in the morning. At first, I didn't know why I was awake. It was dead quiet, the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. Then I felt it, this low vibration coming up through the ground, like something really heavy was walking nearby. Not like a person, but something bigger, with a weight that made the earth tremble under our tent. I lay there frozen, my heart hammering in my chest, trying to tell myself it was just a deer or maybe a bear, even though I knew bears don't usually wander around those parts. But this felt different. The vibrations were slow and deliberate, like whatever it was knew exactly where it was going. Then I heard the breathing. It was deep and raspy, right outside the tent flap, so close I could almost feel the heat of it. It wasn't like any animal I'd ever heard, more like a human with a bad cold, but way deeper, with this guttural edge that made the hairs on my arms stand up. I held my breath, hoping it would go away, but it just stayed there, huffing and puffing like it was sniffing the air or something. I could feel the tent fabric vibrating with each exhale. My friend was snoring softly next to me, completely oblivious. and I wanted to shake him awake, but I was too scared to move. I thought if I stayed still, it might think I was asleep and leave. After what felt like forever, my throat got dry and itchy from holding my breath, and I had to clear it. It was just a little cough, barely audible, but the second I did it, the breathing stopped. For a split second, I thought maybe it was gone. Then I heard it, the exact same sound I'd just made, but deeper and rougher, like it was mimicking me. It sent this icy chill straight down my spine, and I felt my whole body go cold. I'd heard stories about animals copying sounds, but this wasn't some parrot or crow. This was something else, something that sounded intelligent, like it was playing with me. I couldn't see anything through the tent, but I knew it was right there, just inches away, and the fear was so intense I thought I might piss myself. That's when I lost it. I sat up and yelled, "I have a gun! Get the hell away from us!" My voice was shaky, but loud enough that it should have woken the dead. My friend didn't even stir. He just rolled over and kept snoring. I couldn't believe it. Here I was, screaming my head off, and he's sleeping like a baby. Part of me was pissed, but mostly I was terrified because I realized how alone I was in that moment. After I yelled, the mimicking stopped, and I heard heavy footsteps moving away from the tent, toward the pond. They were slow and deliberate, and I could still feel the ground shaking a little with each step. I stayed crouched in the tent, listening, my ears straining for any sound. Then I heard this weird noise from the pond, like cupping sounds, splashing and gulping, as if something was scooping water with its hands and drinking. It went on for a minute or two, and all I could think was how big it must be to make those kinds of sounds. I've heard deer drink, and it's gentle, but this was loud and messy, like a giant taking big handfuls. After that, the footsteps started coming back, and my heart leaped into my throat. I thought it was coming for us. But instead, I heard this scraping, climbing sound against the high wall. It was slow and methodical, like it was pulling itself up the rock face, and then the vibrations faded away as it moved higher. I stayed awake for what felt like hours, just listening until the sky started to lighten with the first hints of dawn. When the sun finally came up, I crawled out of the tent, my legs wobbly from fear and lack of sleep. My friend woke up and asked why I looked so rough, and I told him everything. He laughed it off at first, saying I probably had a bad dream, but then we went over to the pond to check things out. That's when we saw them, footprints in the mud near the water's edge. They were huge, like 18 inches long, with a shape that wasn't quite human. Wider at the front, with deep impressions that showed how heavy whatever made them was. We followed them for a bit, and they led right up to the base of the high wall where the climbing sounds had come from. My friend stopped laughing then. He just stared at them, his face pale. We packed up our stuff in a hurry and got out of there, not saying much on the drive home. I've never been able to shake that night. It wasn't just the size of the thing or the sounds, it was the intelligence behind it. The way it mimicked me, like it was mocking my fear. I've gone over it in my head 1,000 times, trying to find some logical explanation, but nothing fits. It's been years, and I still get chills thinking about it. Sometimes, when I'm alone in the woods, I'll catch a whiff of something foul, like wet dog, and it all comes rushing back. I don't camp much anymore, and if I do, I make sure it's nowhere near those old strip mines. Whatever that was, it's still out there, and I hope to God I never hear it again. Story 13. Okay, so I've been sitting on this for years, and I don't really talk about it much, because people either think I'm crazy or making it up for attention. But something happened back in early September of 2014 that still messes with my head. And I need to get it out there. Maybe someone else has been through something similar, or maybe I just need to write it down to make sense of it myself. I was fishing with a buddy along the Clearwater River in north-central Idaho, near this tiny spot called Arca. It's way out there, nothing but trees and water for miles, and most folks avoid it after dark. But we were young and dumb, thought we knew what we were doing. We got there late in the afternoon, maybe around 4 or 5. The sun was still up, but it was that golden hour where everything looked soft and peaceful. The air had that crisp early fall feel, not too cold, but you could tell winter wasn't far off. We parked the truck on a dirt pull-off near the riverbank, grabbed our gear, and hiked down to this gravel bar we'd fished before. It's a wide, flat stretch of rocks and sand right by the water, perfect for casting for steelhead. The river itself is loud, but in a calming way. Just this constant rush and gurgle that makes you forget about everything else. My friend and I didn't talk much at first. We were both tired from the drive, just focused on setting up. I remember the gravel crunching under my boots, the smell of wet stones and pine needles mixing with the river's dampness. We found a good spot where the current slowed down and started casting. The rods whirred as we let out line, and the plop of the lures hitting the water was the only interruption to the river's noise. For a while, it was perfect. Just us, the fish, and the fading light. As dusk started to settle in, maybe around 7 or so, the sky turned this deep orange and purple, and the shadows from the trees on the opposite bank stretched across the water. The temperature dropped a bit, and I zipped up my jacket. My friend lit a cigarette, the smoke adding to the earthy smells around us. We'd been at it for a couple of hours, not catching much, but it didn't matter. It was one of those evenings where just being out there was enough. Then around 8:10, I checked my watch because the light was almost gone. I heard something that made the hair on my arm stand up. At first I thought it was just an animal, maybe a deer or something moving through the woods on the other side of the river. But it wasn't that light, skittery sound deer make. This was different. It was rhythmic, heavy steps, like something big was walking steadily through the underbrush. Thump, thump, thump. Each step had weight to it, like it was sinking into the ground. I stopped reeling in my line and looked over at my friend. He'd heard it too. His eyes were wide, and he put a finger to his lips, signaling me to be quiet. We both froze, listening. The steps kept coming, getting closer to the riverbank. My heart started beating faster, and I could feel this cold knot forming in my stomach. The river was about 50 yards wide where we were, so we had a clear view across. But the trees were thick and dark over there. Then I saw movement. A figure stepped out from between the pines, and my brain took a second to process what I was seeing. It was tall, really tall, and it was walking upright like a person, but it was way too big to be human. I'm not great with estimates, but it had to be over 7 feet, maybe even 8. It was covered in dark, wet-looking hair that glistened in the fading light, and its arms were long and swung as it moved. It didn't pause or look around, it just strode right into the river, wading through the water with these powerful, deliberate steps. The water was knee-deep on it, and it barely slowed down. The sound of its footsteps changed to heavy splashes, but it kept that same rhythm. Thump, splash, thump, splash. My friend and I were still frozen, just staring. I think part of me was trying to convince myself it was a bear, but bears don't walk like that, on 2 legs, and they're not that tall. This thing moved with a purpose, like it knew exactly where it was going. Then it stopped halfway across the river, maybe 20 yards from our side, and turned its head toward us. I couldn't see its face clearly because it was getting dark, but I got the impression of a broad, flat features, and its eyes seemed to catch what little light was left. That's when the fear really hit me. My hands started shaking, and I could hear my own breathing, loud and ragged. My friend whispered, "What the hell is that?" But I didn't have an answer. Before I could even think, the thing let out this deep, guttural roar that felt like it vibrated through my chest. It wasn't like any animal sound I'd ever heard. It was low and rumbling, full of anger or warning, and it echoed off the trees. The roar seemed to suck all the other sounds out of the air. Even the river went quiet in my ears. Then it charged. It came at us fast, splashing through the water, and when it hit the gravel bar, the ground actually shook under my feet. I'm not exaggerating. I felt the vibrations through my boots, like mini earthquakes with each step. It closed the distance in seconds, and I swear it was within 40 yards before my brain kicked into gear. My friend yelled, "Run!" And we both dropped our rods and took off. I've never been so scared in my life. It was pure, raw panic. I scrambled up the gravel bar toward the trees where we'd left the truck, my legs feeling like jelly. The gravel was loose and my feet slipped a couple of times. I could hear the thing behind us, its footsteps pounding, and that musky, earthy smell hit my nostrils, like wet dog and rotting leaves, but stronger, overwhelming. It was so close I could almost feel its breath, though I didn't look back. My friend was ahead of me, and I tripped over a rock or something, landing hard on my hands. The gravel scraped my palms raw, and I felt the sting immediately, but I didn't care. Adrenaline took over, and I pushed myself up, kept running. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it might burst, and my lungs burned from the cold air. I could hear my friend shouting, "Come on, come on!" and the sound of that thing getting closer. Its steps were heavy and fast, and I imagined it reaching out to grab me. Somehow, we made it to the truck. My friend fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking so bad he dropped them. I scooped them up, my own hands bleeding and trembling, and unlocked the doors. We jumped in, and I turned the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I slammed it into reverse, not even checking behind us. Gravel sprayed as we peeled out, and I didn't look back until we were on the main road, speeding away. The drive back was a blur. We were both silent, just breathing hard, covered in sweat and dirt. My hands hurt like hell, and I could see the blood smeared on the steering wheel. We didn't talk about what happened. We just wanted to get as far away as possible. I kept checking the rear-view mirror, half expecting to see that thing following us, but there was nothing, just darkness. The next morning, we went back. I don't know why. Maybe to prove to ourselves it wasn't a dream, or to see if there was any evidence. The sun was up and everything looked normal, peaceful even. But when we got to the gravel bar, we saw it. Deep footprints in the wet sand and gravel, each one about 16 or 17 inches long, with a clear shape, like a human foot, but wider and with toes that seemed too long. They led from the river to where we'd been standing, and then back into the trees. Our cooler was overturned, the lid ripped off, and our food and drinks scattered everywhere, and that smell was still there, that musky odor hanging in the air like a ghost. We didn't stick around long. We grabbed what we could and left. I've never gone back to that spot, and I don't think I ever will. To this day, I can't explain what that thing was. People talk about Bigfoot or Sasquatch, and I used to laugh it off, but not anymore. Whatever it was real, and it wanted us gone. Sometimes, when I'm trying to sleep, I still hear those heavy steps and that roar, and I feel that same cold fear. I don't know if it was aggressive or just defending its territory, but I do know one thing. We were lucky to get out of there alive. And that's the part that haunts me the most, how close we came to not making it. Story 14. It was the summer of 1989, and I was young and stupid, the kind of guy who thought he was invincible. I'd been hiking the trails around October Mountain in Massachusetts since I was a kid, knew them like the back of my hand. That day, I just wanted to get out, clear my head. It was one of those perfect late summer days, not too hot, the air smelling like pine and damp earth. I told my wife I'd be back by dinner, grabbed my day pack with some water, a sandwich, and my old pair of binoculars, and headed out alone. I liked the solitude. Usually, it was peaceful. That day was different. I was on a well-established trail, one of the main ones that switchbacks up toward the summit. I'd been walking for a couple of hours, just lost in my own thoughts, the rhythm of my boots on the dirt, the sound of my own breathing. The forest was thick there, a mix of hemlock and oak, the sunlight cutting through in scattered patches. It was quiet, the kind of deep quiet you only get miles from any road. I remember feeling completely alone, but in a good way. That's when I saw the movement. up ahead, maybe 100 yards, just off the trail to the left. Something big. My first thought, the only sane thought, was a black bear. We have them around, you see them sometimes, but this was different. The way it moved, it was a stooping kind of motion, but it was upright. It didn't lope like a bear. It was more fluid but awkward at the same time, like it was too big for its own body. I stopped dead in my tracks, my heart giving a little jump. I slowly slid my backpack off my shoulder, my hands feeling clumsy, and pulled out my binoculars. I brought them up to my eyes, my hands shaking just enough to make the image jiggle. It took me a second to find it again, and when I did, my breath caught in my throat. It wasn't a bear. The fur was a reddish-brown, like rusty cinnamon, and it was covered in it. It was tall, so damn tall. It was in a semi-crouch, but even like that, I could tell it would tower over me if it stood up straight. Its head was kind of pointed, like a dome that came to a slight peak, and it seemed to sit right on its shoulders. I couldn't see a neck. But the face, God, the face is what got me. It wasn't a bear's snout. It was flatter, and it had these deep-set eyes, dark pits in its face. It looked disturbingly human. Not like a person, but like a grotesque mask of one. Something about the set of its features was just wrong, a parody of a face. A cold dread started seeping into my gut, a kind of primal fear I'd never felt before. This wasn't curiosity anymore. It was a deep, animal-level warning screaming in my head. I crouched down low behind a fallen log, the damp moss soaking into the knees of my jeans. My heart wasn't just beating fast anymore. It was hammering against my ribs, a frantic, painful thumping I could feel in my ears. I was afraid to make a sound, afraid to even breathe too loud. I kept the binoculars glued to my eyes. It was doing something. It was moving around in a small, rocky clearing, crouching down and picking up rocks, not throwing them. It was lifting them, big ones I would have struggled with, and it was stacking them. It was making little piles like cairns. It would place one rock, then another on top with a deliberate, careful motion. Then it would stop, and its head would dip down, and it would bring something to its mouth. I couldn't see what it was. Maybe roots it was pulling from the ground, or insects from under the rocks. Its fingers, what I could see of them, were long and dark, not like paws. I don't know how long I stayed there, frozen. Time got weird. It felt like both an instant and an hour. Part of my brain, the dumb, reckless part that had gotten me up there alone, was arguing with the terrified part. You're seeing things. It's a trick of the light. It's just a weird-looking bear. But I knew it wasn't. I knew with a certainty that felt like a physical weight on my chest that I was looking at something that wasn't supposed to exist. That's when the stupid idea took hold. I had to get a better look. I had to be sure. I needed to be closer. It was the dumbest decision of my life, and I still don't know why I did it. I guess I thought if I could just see it clearly, without the binoculars, my brain would be able to make sense of it. So I started to move. I crept out from behind the log, staying low, moving in a half-crouch. I was trying to be a hunter, silent and stealthy, but I was just a scared city boy, playing at something he didn't understand. I moved from tree to tree, my eyes locked on that reddish-brown shape. The air felt thick, heavy. Every little sound I made, the rustle of my jacket, the crunch of a leaf under my boot, sounded like a thunderclap in that silence. I was maybe 50 yards away now. I could see it more clearly. The musculature under the fur, the sheer bulk of its shoulders. It was still stacking rocks, completely absorbed in its task. Then it happened. My foot came down on a dead twig hidden under some leaves. It didn't just snap, it exploded. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet forest. The creature froze, its head snapped up from what it was doing, and it turned. It turned right in my direction. The terror that hit me then was absolute. It was a white-hot wave that wiped out every thought, every instinct except one: run. The thing's eyes, those deep-set dark pits, seemed to lock onto me. There was no rage in them, no curiosity. It was just a blank, ancient sort of gaze, and it was the most terrifying thing I have ever seen. I didn't think. I spun around and I ran. I ran like I have never run before or since. It was a blind, panicked sprint, fueled by pure adrenaline. I wasn't looking at the trail. I was just throwing myself forward, my arms pumping, my lungs burning. Branches whipped at my face and arms, scratching me, but I didn't feel a thing. The only thing I felt was the crushing, suffocating fear that it was right behind me, that I was about to feel those long, dark fingers close around my neck. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe some desperate need to know. But I risked a glance over my shoulder. I was expecting to see it charging after me, a monstrous blur of muscle and fur. It wasn't. It was just standing there, right where I'd last seen it, at the edge of the clearing. It was standing fully upright now, and it was even bigger than I'd imagined, 7 feet tall at least, maybe more. It wasn't looking at me like it was about to give chase. It was perfectly still. Its head was tilted to the side, like a dog hearing a high-pitched sound. It was sniffing the air. I could see its chest expand. It was taking in my scent. We looked at each other for what felt like an eternity, but it was probably only a second or two. Me, frozen mid-stride, panting and terrified. It, a silent, impossible statue in the woods. Then, without a sound, it turned and stepped into the thicker trees. It didn't crash through the undergrowth. It didn't make a single noise. It just vanished. 1 second it was there, a solid physical thing, and the next, the forest had swallowed it whole. It was like it had never been there at all. I didn't stop running. I ran all the way down the mountain, stumbling, falling, scraping my hands and knees, getting back up and running again. I didn't stop until I burst out of the tree line and saw my truck sitting in the empty parking lot. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the door unlocked. I threw myself inside, locked the doors, and just sat there, gripping the steering wheel, my entire body trembling uncontrollably. I sat there for a long time, just trying to catch my breath, trying to make my heart slow down. I kept looking at the tree line, expecting to see it step out, but the forest was just a wall of green, silent and indifferent. The drive home was a blur. I kept checking my rearview mirror, not for cars, but for something else. I walked into my house, and my wife took one look at me, pale, scratched up, clothes dirty, and asked what happened. I just said I took a fall, that I was fine. I couldn't tell her. I knew how it would sound. I took a shower, the water so hot it was almost scalding, and I still felt cold, a deep internal chill that wouldn't go away. I didn't go hiking alone for weeks after that. I made excuses. When I finally did go back into the woods, it was never the same. The peace was gone. The silence felt threatening. Every snap twig, every rustle in the bushes made me jump. I started carrying a rifle with me, a heavy .3006, something that could stop a bear. I told myself it was for bears, but I knew, and I still know, what I was really afraid of. I was afraid of seeing that tall, reddish-brown shape again, of meeting those deep-set, disturbingly human eyes. I never went back to that specific part of the trail. I've never told anyone this story until now. It's been decades, and I'm an old man. I've had a full life, but sometimes, when I'm trying to fall asleep, I'll see it. I'll see it standing there, perfectly still, head tilted, sniffing the air, and I'll remember the absolute, ground-shaking certainty I felt in that moment, the certainty that I was looking at something that walked right out of a nightmare, something that should not be, and the even more terrifying certainty that it was looking right back at me. I never found those stacked rocks. I never went looking. Some things you're just better off not knowing. I just know what I saw that day on October Mountain, and it's something I will never, ever be able to explain. Story 15. We got to the lake around 7:30, and the place was dead silent. I mean, usually you hear birds chirping, maybe squirrels rustling in the underbrush, but that day It was like someone had hit the mute button. My friend noticed it too. He's not one to spook easily, but he mentioned how weird it was that there weren't even any mosquitoes buzzing around. We shrugged it off and started setting up our spots on the bank, near this old fallen log we always use as a seat. The water was calm, almost glassy, with a thin mist hanging over it that made the far shore look hazy and distant. I remember feeling a little on edge, but I chalked it up to the gloomy weather. We cast our lines and settled in, joking around about work and stuff, trying to ignore the stillness. After about an hour, I heard something, a low, gurgling sound coming from the water, like a big rock had been dropped in somewhere out of sight. At first, I thought it might be a beaver or something, but it was deeper, more resonant. My friend heard it too. He stopped mid-sentence and just stared out at the lake. Then a few minutes later, a group of ducks that had been floating near the reeds on the other side suddenly took off in a panic, squawking and flapping like they'd been scared out of their minds. They didn't just fly away, it was like they were fleeing something, and that got my heart thumping a little harder. We kept fishing, but the mood had shifted. The silence felt heavier now, and I found myself glancing over my shoulder every now and then. Around 10 in the morning, the wind picked up slightly, rustling the leaves, but it didn't bring any comfort. It just made the trees seem like they were whispering. Then, out of nowhere, this smell hit us. It was awful, like a mix of rotten eggs and something chemical, maybe ammonia, with a hint of wet dog or skunk. It was so strong it made my eyes water and my throat feel tight. My friend coughed and waved a hand in front of his face, saying, "What the hell is that?" The odor seemed to come in waves, drifting across the lake from the direction where the ducks had fled. It clung to everything, and I could taste it in the back of my mouth, metallic and sour. We tried to ignore it and focus on fishing, but I kept feeling like we were being watched. My skin was crawling, and I had this urge to pack up and leave, but we'd driven all the way out there, and I didn't want to seem paranoid. So we stuck it out, and for a while things calmed down. The smell faded a bit, and we caught a couple of small trout, nothing special. But then, around noon, I saw movement in the trees on the far side of the lake. At first, I thought it was a deer, maybe a big one, but it was too upright, too bulky. I nudged my friend and pointed, and we both squinted through the mist. That's when I saw it, a tall, dark figure standing just at the edge of the tree line. It was maybe 100 yards away, but even from that distance, I could tell it was huge, way bigger than a person. It was covered in what looked like dark, matted hair, and it was just standing there, not moving, like it was staring right at us. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt this cold dread wash over me. My friend whispered, "Holy shit!" and we both froze, rods forgotten in our hands. The figure didn't make a sound. It just stood there for what felt like forever, maybe 30 seconds, before it turned and melted back into the trees. But the way it moved, it was smooth, almost fluid, not like an animal loping, but something more deliberate. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears, and my hands were shaking. We didn't say much after that. We just started packing up our gear as fast as we could, not even bothering to reel in our lines properly. The smell came back stronger than ever, like it was following us, and I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see that figure again. We threw everything in the truck and got the hell out of there, driving back to my place in near silence. The whole way, I couldn't shake the image of that thing standing there, and the smell seemed to linger in my nostrils, even with the windows rolled down. When we got back, it was only around 2 in the afternoon, but the day felt like it had stretched on forever. We tried to laugh it off, saying it was probably just a bear or something, but we both knew bears don't stand like that, and they don't smell that bad. Later that night, after my friend had gone home, I was sitting in my living room with the lights off, just staring out the window, when I heard it, a deep, guttural roar from somewhere in the woods behind my house. It wasn't like any animal I've ever heard. It was low and drawn out, full of this raw, sorrowful anger that made the hair on my arms stand up. It happened 2 or 3 times over the next hour, each one closer than the last, and I spent the whole night awake, too scared to sleep, with every little noise making me jump. The next day, I asked around the neighborhood, and a couple of other people said they'd heard similar roars over the past week, but no one had seen anything. I never went back to that lake, and my friend and I don't talk about it much. Even now, years later, I'll sometimes wake up in a cold sweat, remembering that figure and those sounds. I don't know what it was, and I probably never will, but that day left me with a fear of the woods that I can't shake. It's like something out there knows we're around, and it's watching. Story 16. Okay, so this is something I've never really talked about outside of my close friends, and even then, it's hard to put into words. But I need to get it out there because it's been eating at me for years now. This happened back in August of 2016. Me and 3 buddies decided to go camping up near the Okanogan National Forest in Washington, not far from this little town called Winthrop. We were all in our late 20s, just looking to get away from the city for a weekend, you know? Do some hiking, maybe fish a bit, just chill around a fire. We'd been planning it for weeks, and we were pumped. We got there on August 13th, a Saturday. I remember it was one of those perfect summer days, sunny but not too hot, with a breeze that kept the bugs down. The drive up was gorgeous, winding through pine forests and past rivers that looked like they were straight out of a postcard. We parked the car off this dirt road that was pretty rough, had to hike in about a mile to this clearing we'd scouted on a map. It was a nice spot, flat and open, surrounded by thick trees on all sides. You could hear birds chirping and the rustle of leaves, nothing too wild. Felt like we had the whole place to ourselves. Setting up camp took a while because we were laughing and joking around, taking our time. We had 2 tents, a big one for me and 2 of the guys, and a smaller one for our other friend who snored like a chainsaw. We got a fire pit going, cleared away some rocks, and gathered dry wood. By the time we were done, the sun was starting to dip behind the trees, casting long shadows that made everything feel a little eerie, but in a good way, like that quiet you only get out in the woods. We cooked dinner over the fire, hot dogs and beans, nothing fancy, but it tasted amazing after the hike. The smoke from the fire smelled like pine and burnt wood, and we were just sitting there, passing around a cooler of beers, talking about work and stupid stuff from college. As it got darker, the sounds changed. The birds quieted down, and you could hear crickets starting up, along with this occasional hoot from an owl somewhere. We had our flashlights out, but mostly we relied on the firelight. It was cozy, you know. But then, around 10:30 at night, things started to get weird. I remember because I checked my watch. It was one of those analog ones with glow-in-the-dark hands. We were just sitting around telling ghost stories when one of my friends, let's call him Dave, because I don't want to use real names, he pointed toward the trees to the west. "You guys see that?" he said, his voice kinda low. At first I thought he was messing with us, but then I saw it too. Pairs of glowing eyes way up in the trees. They were reflecting the firelight, this weird yellowish glow, and they were high up, like 8 to 10 feet off the ground. I've seen deer eyes at night, but these were different, bigger, and they didn't move like an animal's. They just stayed there, watching us. We all froze for a second, then someone laughed it off, said it was probably just raccoons or something, but raccoons don't sit that high, and their eyes aren't that bright. We shined our flashlights over, and the eyes vanished, like they ducked behind the branches. For a few minutes, we tried to brush it off, but the mood had shifted. We kept our voices down, and I could feel this knot forming in my stomach. Then, from the east side of the clearing, we saw more pairs of eyes. Same thing, glowing, high up, just staring. This time, no one laughed. We all stood up, grabbing our flashlights tighter. The fire was crackling, but it felt like the only sound in the world was our breathing. I remember my heart starting to pound, like it was trying to beat its way out of my chest. My palms were sweaty, and I kept wiping them on my jeans. That's when we heard the footsteps. At first, it was just a soft crunch, like someone stepping on dry leaves. But then, it got heavier. This thud, thud, thud that sounded way too big for a bear or anything we knew. Branches started snapping, not little twigs, but thick ones, like something was pushing through the undergrowth. The sounds came from different directions, like whatever it was. There was more than one. We grouped together, backs to the fire, shining our lights into the trees. The beams would catch movement, but nothing clear, just shadows shifting, leaves rustling. I remember one of my friends whispering, "What the hell is that?" And none of us had an answer. My throat felt dry, and I kept swallowing, but it didn't help. The air got colder, or maybe it was just me, but I started shivering even though I had a jacket on. The fire was still going, but it felt like the darkness was pressing in on us. We could hear those footsteps getting closer, and now there was this low, grunting sound, not loud, but deep, like it was vibrating through the ground. I could feel it in my feet, this rumble that made my legs feel weak. Then, at 11:20, I know because I checked my watch again, my hands were shaking so bad. Two figures stepped out of the trees into the clearing. They came from the east side by side, and I swear I've never seen anything like it. They were massive, both of them, standing 8 or 9 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they looked like football players on steroids, covered in dark, shaggy hair that looked almost black in the firelight, but when we shined our flashlights on them, it had this reddish tint in places. Their eyes, God, their eyes were this amber color, glowing under the light, and they were fixed on us. We all just stood there, frozen. I couldn't move, couldn't even breathe for a second. One of my friends let out this choked sound, like he was trying to scream, but nothing came out. The Sasquatch, I know people call them Bigfoot, but in that moment, they were just these terrifying things. They started walking toward us, not fast, but steady, like they were taking their time. Their footsteps were heavy, each one making this thud that I could feel in my chest. They got to within about 25 yards of us, and we could see how big they really were. Their arms were long, hanging down almost to their knees, and their faces, I don't even know how to describe it. Not human, but not quite animal either. More like something in between, with a flat nose and a heavy brow. One of them raised an arm, like it was shielding its face from our flashlight beams. It didn't look aggressive, more like it was annoyed by the light, but that made it even scarier. Like it was intelligent, you know? Not just some dumb beast. Its hand was huge, fingers thick and covered in hair, and it moved slowly, deliberately. I could see the muscles in its shoulders bunching up under the fur. The other one just stood there, watching us, and I felt this primal fear wash over me. My legs were trembling, and I had to lock my knees to keep from falling over. My friend next to me was gripping my arm so hard it hurt, but I didn't even notice at the time. We didn't say a word. None of us did. It was like we were all trapped in this nightmare, waiting for something to happen. The Sasquatch stood there for what felt like forever, but it was probably only a minute or two. Then, as suddenly as they appeared, they turned and walked back into the trees. Not running, just fading into the darkness, and the sounds of their footsteps faded too. We stayed where we were, too scared to move, for I don't know how long. The fire was dying down and the woods were quiet again, but it wasn't the same quiet as before. It felt heavy, like the air was thick with something we couldn't see. Eventually, we managed to stumble back to our tents. No one slept that night. We just huddled together, listening for any sound, jumping at every little noise. I kept my flashlight on, pointing it at the tent door, my heart racing every time the wind rustled the fabric. I could smell the sweat on my clothes, mixed with the scent of fear, that metallic tang you get when you're really scared. My mind was racing, going over everything, trying to make sense of it, but there was no sense to be made. It was just this raw, gut-level terror that stuck with me. When the first light of dawn started to creep in, we packed up as fast as we could. Our hands were shaking so bad we could barely fold the tents. We didn't talk much, just rushed to get everything into our backpacks and get out of there. As we were leaving, we decided to take a quick look around the clearing, and that's when we saw the evidence. Large footprints in the soft dirt near the trees, each one about 16 to 18 inches long, with deep impressions like whatever made them weighed a ton. The toes were broad, and you could see the outline clear as day. Some of the smaller trees nearby were bent or snapped, like something big had pushed through them, and the vegetation was trampled in places. We took a few photos with our phones, but we didn't stick around to investigate further. We just wanted to get to the car and drive away. The hike back felt twice as long as when we came in, every shadow making me jump. When we finally reached the vehicle, we threw our stuff in and took off, not even stopping to talk until we were back on the main road. I've replayed that night in my head 1,000 times since then. I've read other accounts online, and some people say they've seen similar things, but nothing makes it less real or less frightening. To this day, I can't explain what we saw. It wasn't a bear, wasn't a person in a suit. It was something else, something that shouldn't exist, but does. I don't go camping in deep woods anymore, and every time I hear a branch snap outside, my heart still races. That encounter changed me, made me realize how little we really know about the world, and sometimes late at night, I'll wake up thinking I see those amber eyes in the dark, and I'm right back there, frozen in fear, wondering what would have happened if we'd stayed any longer. Story 17. It was one of those thick, heavy summer evenings we get down here in rural Florida, the kind where the air feels like a warm, wet blanket the second you step outside. The year was 2018. I remember the date because it was late July, and my wife was visiting her sister up in Tallahassee for the week, leaving me alone in the house. I didn't mind the solitude. I've always liked the quiet. I was out on the back porch, just sitting in one of the old wooden Adirondack chairs I'd been meaning to sand and repaint for years. I had the porch light off because the bugs here will carry you away if you give them half a chance. And I was just enjoying the night sounds. It's a symphony out there after the sun goes down. The crickets were going full tilt, a constant chirping rhythm, and the frogs from the nearby swamp were belting out their deep guttural croaks. It was loud, a real wall of sound that you just get used to. It's the sound of everything being normal, and then it stopped. It wasn't a gradual thing. It wasn't like one frog stopped, then another. It was like someone threw a switch. 1 second, the night was alive and buzzing, and the next, it was dead silent. I mean, completely, utterly silent. You don't realize how much noise there is until it's all gone. The hair on my arm stood up. That's the first thing you learn living out here in the sticks. When the woods go quiet, something's out there that doesn't belong. A predator, a big one. I sat perfectly still, not even daring to breathe too loud. My heart was starting to thump a little harder in my chest. I was just staring out into the backyard, which slopes down into a tangle of hardwoods and then the swamp beyond. It was pitch black out there, the kind of dark your eyes never really adjust to. I was straining to hear anything at all, but there was nothing, just the dull ringing in my own ears. That's when I saw the light. It was off to the left, maybe 50 feet into the tree line, right at the edge of where my yard ends and the wild begins. It was a bright white orb, just hovering about knee-high off the ground. It wasn't attached to anything. It wasn't a flashlight beam. It didn't cast any light on the trees or the ferns around it. It was just a ball of light, self-contained, like a giant firefly, but perfectly still and silent. It was maybe the size of a softball. It just hung there in the air, not moving. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. This wasn't right. This wasn't a car headlight from some distant road or a kid with a lantern. There are no roads back there, just miles of swamp and state forest. I sat forward in my chair, the old wood creaking under my weight, and I kept my eyes locked on it. The silence was still absolute, pressing in on my eardrums. Then the orb started to move. It didn't zip or dart. It moved smoothly, almost lazily, gliding parallel to the tree line. It moved like it was on a track, just a straight, steady glide for about 20 feet. It was so unnatural, so perfectly controlled, that my brain was just stuttering, trying to find a box to put it in and coming up empty. Then it just rose. It went straight up, about 10 feet into the air, hung there for a second, and then it blinked out, not like it faded or shot away. It was just there one moment and gone the next. Vanished, like it had never been. The silence felt deeper after that, heavier. I was holding my breath, my hands gripping the arms of the chair. My mind was racing, trying to explain what I'd just seen. A drone. No, it was completely silent. No hum, no buzz, nothing. A trick of the eye, but it had been too real, too defined, and then I heard the footsteps. The sound came from exactly where the orb had been. It was a heavy, crunching sound. Not like a deer. A deer is light, quick. This was a slow, deliberate thump, crush, thump, crush. Something big was walking out there, and it was stepping on fallen branches, snapping them under its weight. The sound was loud in the dead, quiet night. Each step sent a fresh jolt of fear through me. This was real. There was something physical out there now. My fight or flight kicked in, hard. I'm not a brave man. My first instinct was to run inside and lock the door. But a weird, morbid curiosity mixed with the terror held me there for a second. I had to see. I had to know what was making that sound. I slowly, carefully reached down beside my chair, where I keep a heavy-duty Maglite flashlight. My fingers closed around the cool, knurled aluminum. It felt solid, familiar, a little piece of security. I stood up, my legs feeling a little shaky, and I clicked the light on. The beam cut through the darkness, a bright white shaft that illuminated the trunks of the pines and the broad fan-like leaves of the cabbage palms. I swept it back and forth across the area where I'd heard the steps. At first I didn't see anything, just trees, shadows, Spanish moss, hanging like tattered curtains. Then I saw it. Behind a thick cluster of cabbage palms, maybe 60 feet away, something was standing. It was tall, so damn tall. My brain tried to process it as a tree, a shadow, anything else, but it was a figure. It was mostly black or a very dark brown, and it was covered in what looked like wet, matted fur. It was just standing there, half hidden by the palm fronds, but I could see its shoulders. They were impossibly wide, like a football player in pads. And then I saw the eyes. I shined the light right on it, and 2 points of light flashed back at me from the darkness. They weren't red like a gator's. They were a bright, glowing amber, like old honey held up to the sun. The light didn't seem to bother it. It didn't flinch or shield its eyes. It just stood there, and for a second that felt like an hour. We looked at each other. Me, a 50-something man standing on his porch with a stupid flashlight, and this thing in my woods. A chill ran down my spine, so cold and sharp it felt like a physical thing, like an ice-cold needle tracing my vertebrae. My blood went cold. This wasn't a bear. Bears don't stand like that. They don't have shoulders like that, and they sure as hell don't have eyes that glow like that. This was something else, something I had no name for. Then it moved. It didn't run. It turned its head away from the light, and then its whole body pivoted with a surprising fluid grace. It took a step, and then another, and it just melted into the deeper darkness of the woods. The sound of its footsteps receded, the heavy crunch, crunch, crunch getting fainter and fainter until it was gone. I kept the flashlight beam trained on the spot for a long time, my heart hammering against my ribs like it wanted out. I was shaking all over, a fine, uncontrollable tremor. The night sounds didn't come back. The woods stayed silent. I stood there on the porch for what felt like an hour, maybe more, just scanning the tree line, waiting for it to come back, for those amber eyes to reappear. But nothing happened. The darkness was just darkness again. I finally went inside, locking the sliding glass door and pulling the curtain shut. I spent the rest of the night sitting in my living room with all the lights on, jumping at every little creak and groan the old house made. I didn't sleep a wink. My mind was just replaying it over and over. The silence, the orb, the heavy steps, and that tall, dark figure with the wide shoulders and the amber eyes that looked right back at me. The next morning, when the sun was up and the world felt normal again, I went outside. I walked down to the tree line, my steps cautious. I didn't know what I was looking for. Footprints. I looked, but the ground was a mess of pine needles and leaves. I couldn't find anything definite. But I did find a couple of small saplings that were snapped in half about chest high for me, which would have been about knee high for whatever that thing was. A few days later, I saw my neighbor, Carl, who lives about a half-mile down the dirt road. We were both getting our mail. He's lived out here his whole life, knows these woods better than anyone. I didn't know how to bring it up without sounding crazy, so I just said something like, "Hey, you ever see anything weird out in the woods at night?" He got real quiet for a minute, then he nodded, his face serious. "Weird how?" he asked. I told him about the light, leaving out the part about the figure. I just said I saw a strange light, and then the woods went quiet. He looked at me, and I could see in his eyes that he knew. He knew exactly what I was talking about. "Seen those lights myself a few times," he said, his voice low, "hovering out over the swamp, and the sounds. You hear the screams." I shook my head, my throat feeling tight. "Don't sound like any animal I know," he continued. "Sounds almost human, but wrong, like something trying to copy a person. Gives me the damn creeps every time." He just shook his head and went back to his truck. That conversation sealed it for me. I wasn't going crazy. Something is out there, something that comes with those strange, silent lights and leaves a trail of broken branches and a deep, primal fear in its wake. The terror of that night wasn't just in seeing the figure. It was in that sequence, that awful, logical progression. The world goes silent. You see something you can't explain, and then you find out that the unexplainable thing has a physical form, a form that is big and powerful and knows you're there. It was the chill that shot through me when that orb vanished and the footsteps started, the sudden gut-level realization that I was not at the top of the food chain in my own backyard. I still think about it every time I hear the frogs stop singing. I still look out into the dark and I wonder. Story 18. It was October of 2021, and I was stupid. Not in an academic sense, but in a deciding to go deep into the Smoky Mountains by myself kind of way. I'd done solo hikes before, plenty of them, but never this far out. The plan was to follow a remote tributary that fed into Fontana Lake, a spot I'd seen on a topo map that promised complete solitude. The weather was perfect for it, you know. That crisp, cool autumn air that makes you feel alive, the kind that smells like damp earth and dying leaves. The colors were insane, fiery reds and brilliant yellows against a deep green backdrop. It felt good to be out there, just me and the woods. I'd been hiking for about an hour, maybe a little more. I was following a faint game trail that ran parallel to the creek. The sound of the water, a constant, gentle white noise. I remember stopping to adjust my backpack strap, and that's when I saw them. The ground was soft and sandy there, a little patch of bare earth between the tree roots, and pressed deep into it was a footprint. It wasn't a bear track. I know what a bear track looks like. This was different. It was long, I mean really long. I'd guess about 17 inches from heel to toe. And the toes, they were defined like a person's, but the whole thing was just massive. The stride between them was huge, way bigger than my own. If I tried to step from one to the next, I'd have to take a running leap. My first thought was a prank, some joker with a wooden stomper. But who would be out here? This wasn't a trail. There was no one around for miles. A weird mix of curiosity and dread started bubbling in my gut. It's that feeling you get when you know you should turn around, but you just have to see. I decided to follow the tracks. I told myself it was just to see where they led, to prove to myself it was nothing. I started walking, carefully placing my boots to the side of the impressions. The tracks led downhill, angling towards the sound of the creek. The forest was quiet, but I hadn't really noticed how quiet until then. The birds had stopped singing. There was no chattering of squirrels. It was just the creek and the sound of my own breathing. That's when the first real prickle of fear went up my neck. The tracks went right down to the water's edge and then just stopped. They didn't turn around, they didn't wander off into the bushes. They went right up to the creek bank and ended, as if whatever made them had just stepped into the water and vanished. The creek was maybe 20-25 feet wide there, shallow and rocky. I crouched down on the sandy bank to get a closer look at the last print. The edges were sharp, the mud pushed up around the heel. It was fresh, very fresh. That's when I saw movement. Across the creek on a gravel bar that stuck out into the water, something stood up. My brain didn't process it at first. It was like looking at a distorted tree stump, my mind trying to make it into something it knew. But then it moved and the shape solidified. It was a creature. There's no other word for it. It was massive, standing upright on two legs, but it was taller than any man I've ever seen. It had to be over 7 feet tall, maybe closer to 8. Its body was covered in dark, shaggy hair, like a wet bear, but it wasn't built like a bear. It had these incredibly broad, powerful-looking shoulders, and its arms were long, hanging down past its knees. It was just standing there, facing me, and it was staring right at me. I froze. My entire body just locked up. My heart wasn't just pounding. It was slamming against my ribs so hard I could feel it in my teeth. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. We just looked at each other for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few seconds. Then it let out this sound. It wasn't a roar, not at first. It was a loud, chest-deep huff, like a massive exhale. I heard it clearly from 50 yards away, a deep, wet sound that carried over the gurgle of the creek. The air left its mouth in a visible plume in the cool air. It raised one of its long arms, and I flinched, thinking it was coming for me, but it didn't. It swung its arm down and slapped the surface of the creek. The sound was a sharp, loud crack that echoed off the trees. Water exploded upwards, and ripples spread out in a frantic circle. My paralysis broke. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to run, but some deeper, more primal part of me knew that was the worst thing I could do. Predators chase. So I stayed crouched, my muscles so tense they were starting to ache. It took a step into the water, then another. Its legs were so long it was only in up to its knees, but the splashes were huge. As it moved, it made another sound, a low, guttural growl that seemed to vibrate right through the ground and into my bones. The growl rose in pitch, turning into a short, powerful roar that wasn't like anything in a movie. It was raw and ragged, full of something that sounded like pure aggression. It stomped one of its feet down hard, sending a spray of water high into the air. Then, in a motion that was shockingly fast, it turned and slammed a fist into a young sapling on the bank. The tree, which was probably as thick as my wrist, snapped in half with a sound like a gunshot. The top half of the tree crashed down into the brush. That's when I started backing up, slowly, so slowly. I kept my eyes locked on it, my hands scrabbling behind me in the sand for purchase. I was trembling all over, a full-body shake that I had no control over. And it mirrored me. It didn't cross the creek. It started walking along the opposite shore, pacing me. Its strides were long and effortless, covering ground I had to struggle to retreat from. It was herding me. It was letting me know it could keep up without even trying. It bent down, its movements fluid and powerful, and picked up a rock from the gravel bar. The rock was big, the size of a cantaloupe. It straightened up, looked right at me, and hurled it. It didn't throw it at me, not directly. It threw it into the water between us. The rock hit the surface with a tremendous splash, and the water plume landed less than 30 feet from my bank. Drops of cold creek water speckled my face. It was a warning shot, a display of power and terrifying accuracy. That's when the smell hit me. A wave of musky, sour stench, like rotten meat and wet dog and something else, something foul and wild. It was so strong it made my eyes water and my stomach turn. I gagged, fighting the urge to vomit. The whole time, it was vocalizing. Not constant roaring, but these low rumbles, these deep guttural growls that seemed to be a form of communication. It was talking. It was telling me to get out. I kept backing away, my heart hammering, my breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. I must have gone about 50 yards like that, a slow, terrifying crab walk up the bank, never taking my eyes off it. It kept pace with me the entire way, its dark form moving silently through the trees on the other side. Then it stopped. It just stood there in the shallows, the water swirling around its legs. It looked at me for one last, long moment, and then it tilted its head back. It let out a call. It started low, a deep rumble, and then it rose, climbing in pitch and volume into this long, ululating scream that echoed through the entire valley. It was a sound of pure, ancient wildness, a sound that didn't belong in this world. It pierced right through me, and I felt a cold terror that I didn't know was possible. The call ended as abruptly as it began. The creature turned, its shaggy form blending instantly into the shadows of the trees, and it was gone. Just like that. I didn't wait. I scrambled to my feet, my legs like jelly, and I ran. I didn't look back. I crashed through undergrowth, not caring about the noise, just needing to put distance between me and that creek. I climbed the ridge behind me, my lungs burning, my hands shaking so violently. I could barely grip the saplings to pull myself up. When I finally reached a small clearing near the top, I collapsed against a tree, gasping for air. I fumbled for my water bottle, but my hands were trembling so bad I couldn't even open the damn cap. I just sat there, leaning against the tree, listening to the sound of my own terrified panting. The woods were still silent. I stayed there for a long time, maybe an hour, just trying to get my body to stop shaking. The feeling of being stalked, of being sized up and intimidated by something that was so much stronger and faster than me, was burned into my brain. That wasn't a random animal encounter, that was an interaction. It saw me, it assessed me, and it deliberately scared me off its territory. The intelligence in its eyes, the calculated way it moved and threw that rock. It was conscious, it knew what it was doing. I finally managed to get my water open and drank half the bottle in one go, the water tasting like metal from my own fear. I got up and started hiking back to my car, my head on a swivel, jumping at every snapped twig, every rustle of leaves. The hike out felt 10 times longer than the hike in. The beautiful autumn colors now just looked like hiding spots. The peaceful silence felt like a trap. I got back to my car as the sun was starting to dip below the mountains. I threw my pack in the back seat, got in, and locked the doors. I just sat there for a long time, hands gripping the steering wheel, staring at the tree line. I was safe, but I didn't feel safe. I felt vulnerable. That creature had stripped away every illusion of control I had. It showed me that in its world, I was just a visitor and not a welcome one. The terror stayed with me for days. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it standing there on the gravel bar, heard that final rising call. I felt that primal, gut-wrenching fear all over again. I haven't gone back into the deep woods alone since. I don't think I ever will. And sometimes, when the wind is just right, or when I hear a strange sound outside at night, I remember that musky, sour smell, and my heart starts to race all over again. I can't explain what it was. I just know what I saw, and I know that it saw me.